Chapter 709. Li Yu trusted Crown Prince Chongming, who had known her for many years. That was why she betrayed and killed in the capital of the Yin Kingdom tonight. Xian Zhilong trusted Li Yu, but he was an intelligent imperial general. He did not forget to make his own arrangements, while cooperating with the Yin Kingdom, according to Li Yu's request. To be on the safe side, he arranged an escape route for the thousands of Tang armored cavalrymen who had sneaked into the capital. That escape route was the most inconspicuous East City Gate. The military order was passed from the restaurant to all parts of the capital through fireworks and death knights. The Tang cavalrymen fought bravely towards the East City Gate and gradually gathered. If the Tang cavalrymen were allowed to gather and rush out of the gate into the wilderness, then the death zone would become a survival zone. It would be very difficult to wipe out the thousands of cavalrymen. Chongming and Long Qing had such a good opportunity after years of forbearance and disguise. How could they allow such a thing to happen? So they closed the city gates at the beginning of the battle. The Yen people were very cruel. The city gates were not closed like usual. Instead, they were sealed with heavy iron gates and 10,000 kilogram stones. In this way, when they reopened the gates after the battle, they would have to use a lot of labor. Even if the Tang army reached the city gates, they would not be able to get out. The only variable was the East City Gate. This was the survival route that Xian Zhilong had left for the Tang army. Naturally, he had made arrangements here. Several military powerhouses, with more than 100 Tang soldiers, had already taken control of this place. The heavy iron gate was suspended in midair, and the 10,000 kilogram stone was only a few feet away from rolling down the tunnel. The ground outside the city gate was covered in blood, and the corpses of the Yin Kingdom's soldiers were lying in a pool of blood. It could be imagined how dangerous and bloody the previous battle was. The Tang army stood on the waist of the city wall and looked at the city in the night. They listened to the shouting and the sound of buildings collapsing in the distance. Their faces were full of anxiety. At this time, the Yin army in the city was attracted by the powerful Tang cavalrymen. Even if someone noticed the movement at the East City Gate, there was no way to mobilize a strong enough army. But they could not hold on forever. They only hoped to see their comrades as soon as possible. The sound of hooves gradually rose. The faces of the Tang army were filled with surprise. However, moments later, the surprise on their faces turned into anger and disappointment. Many people wearing black priest robes arrived at the East City Gate. The person at the front was wearing a silver mask. It was Prince Long Qing and his fallen commander. Black peach blossoms bloomed. An expert of the Tang army punched the black peach blossom with a thunderous punch. The black peach blossom petals trembled slightly. Another expert of the Tang army jumped down from the city wall. Several powerhouses of the Tang army attacked Long Qing together with tacit understanding. In their eyes, the fallen commanders did not exist at all. There was only the silver-masked man. The aura of heaven and earth suddenly became turbulent and uneasy. The thick skin of the city wall peeled off. The ancient bricks began to tremble. After an unknown amount of time, there was a loud bang. The 10,000 caddy stone fell. The iron gate fell heavily to the ground. We've lost the East Gate. One of the subordinates looked at the warning firework rising from the east, and his face turned ashen. Xian Zhilong stopped, but the expression on his face remained calm. After a moment of silence he said, "Since we can't leave, then we won't. Tell all the battalion generals that the Vanguard Battalion is now facing the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. Tell them that if they don't want to miss such an interesting thing, then they should all go to the archway of the West Hill Divine Palace. Then they can go to the Imperial Palace. Tell them that the goal of the war has changed. Now we only have two goals. The first is to kill all the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. The second is to burn down the Imperial Palace of the Yin Kingdom and kill the Yin Emperor." After a moment of silence, Xian Zhilong said, "If we can achieve these two goals, then even if we die here like idiots, we will have an explanation to the elders of the Tang Empire." Throughout the night, the whole of Qingjing was shaking. The iron gate at the East City Gate was also shaking. From time to time, there was a dull sound of impact, and the sound of punches, kicks, and knives. After a long time, there was no more sound. The sky was getting brighter. Chengjing became much quieter during the day. Only the sound of chasing and fighting could be heard occasionally. The government began to organize civilian workers and government runners to clean up the streets. At noon, the iron gate at the East City Gate was finally pulled up. There were dead bodies everywhere in front of the iron gate. Some of them were from the Tang Empire, some were from the Yin Empire, and some were dressed in strange black robes. As the iron gate was pulled up, the blood that had not completely coagulated flowed out like a stream. Looking at this tragic scene, the civilian workers and soldiers of the Yin Empire were extremely pale. Especially when they saw the deep palm prints and knife marks on the iron gate, they were even more frightened. They secretly wondered if the Tang army was human. How could they have such a terrible determination in such a desperate situation? The Yin Empire and the Tang Empire had been enemies for many years, but they had never won on the battlefield. They had always been humiliated and bullied. The battle last night was undoubtedly the biggest victory that the Yin Empire had ever won against the Tang Empire. It was worthy of being written in a book to express the grievances of the Yin people over the years. In the face of such a victory, the whole country should be celebrating. However, there was no such atmosphere in Chengjing at this time. The people who won were not happy at all. People were cleaning up the broken bodies on the street in fear and disgust. They used brooms to sweep the scattered organs. No one knew how many Yin soldiers and grassland cavalrymen had been trampled into meat paste by the Tang cavalry. There were still sporadic fights in some streets, but no Yin people dared to go near. Only the Yin soldiers and grassland barbarians held weapons and searched around in fear. In the corner of the street, a young Yin soldier found a Tang cavalryman who was not completely dead. He kept slashing with his knife, looking extremely numb and mechanical. The Tang soldier was long dead. At this time, he had been slashed so many times, but he did not feel much pain. He looked up indifferently at the young Yin soldier, his eyes full of sarcasm. He spat at the Yin soldier. There were countless holes in his chest, and he was about to stop breathing. The spittle was bloody and could not reach far. It fell on his own chest and then he died. The young Yin soldier was startled. He threw away his knife and ran away crying. In the northeast of Chengjing, outside the old prince's mansion of Prince Longqing, hundreds of Yin soldiers and grassland cavalrymen surrounded the place. In front of the prince's mansion, there were many corpses of Tang soldiers. Most of them were covered with arrows. A few Tang soldiers had attacked the stone steps, but they could not go any further. There were also a few Tang soldiers standing on the street, surrounded by the heavy siege. They protected Xian Zhilong in the middle. Xian Zhilong was covered in blood, but his face was expressionless. After a while, a few more Tang soldiers fell to the ground. Now only Xian Zhilong and the general of the Imperial Guard camp were left. The general looked around at the approaching enemies and suddenly asked, "General, if we die now, will it be a disgrace to the Tang Empire?" Xian Zhilong said, "All the fault is His Highness and me. It has nothing to do with you." The general said, "That's good. Please send me off, General." Xian Zhilong laughed and coughed. He said, "Not you." The general said seriously, "According to the military law of the Tang Empire, I must die before you." Xian Zhilong stopped smiling and drew out his sword. He said, "You know my swordsmanship is terrible. Please forgive me." The general said, "General, we have been disrespectful since you came to Tuyang City. Please forgive us." Xian Zhilong nodded and chopped down with his sword. Then he looked in the direction of the palace of the Yin Kingdom with a look of regret. The front door of the prince's mansion opened, and Crown Prince Chongming walked out. The army gradually separated, and Prince Longqing walked in from the periphery. The two looked at Xian Zhilong, who was standing with his sword. They had successfully schemed against the Tang general, who was known for his intelligence, and finally won. But they did not feel much joy. Looking at the weak general, Longqing even felt a little cold. In the battle last night, he had suffered a serious knife wound on his shoulder. The power of the Tang Empire's cavalry was too terrifying. The violent and unreasonable counterattack at the end had almost rudely destroyed his whole plan. At the end of the battle, when the Tang army had lost, Xian Zhilong organized a beheading in a very short time. If he had not been protected by two martial arts powerhouses from the West Hill Divine Palace, he would have died in that assassination. The situation would have changed. Xian Jilong looked at Crown Prince Chongming and asked, "How does it feel to be a traitor?" Crown Prince Chongming was still graceful and said, "Everyone has the right to say that I'm a traitor, but you Tangs don't. For countless years the Yin Kingdom has been bullied. During the reign of Marquis Xia, the Yin Kingdom suffered even more. I don't know how many innocent people died under the Tang cavalry. If I join hands with you, it will be a real betrayal." Long Qing walked to Crown Prince Chongming and asked Xian Jilong, "The Tang army's bravery is indeed extraordinary. What I don't understand now is why you haven't killed yourself." Xian Jilong said, "I just want to ask a few questions." "What questions?" "The same question as before. I don't understand why Crown Prince Chongming would join hands with you to set up such a trap. I believe Her Highness in Chong, and will also not understand when she knows the truth. You Tangs always like to flaunt the great harmony of the world. You think that you can really ignore the country after accepting foreigners to be officials in the court and teach in the academy. In fact, you have such a mentality because you have been strong enough in the past years. You have no idea what other people are thinking." Crown Prince Chongming said, "I have been a hostage in Chong for so many years. I have a good relationship with Sister Li Yu, and some Tang officials even advised me to stay in Chong and to be an official. But have you ever thought about what the years in Chang'an mean to me? Have you ever thought that I am a yin after all?" Xian Jilong said after a moment of silence, "The reason why I believe in Her Highness' plan and am willing to trust you is that I know very well that you and Prince Longqing can't coexist. Whether it is for the throne of the Yin Kingdom or for survival, you should want him to die." Crown Prince Chongming said, "Everything is just an illusion. We two brothers actually had a good relationship when we were young. Later on, when our mothers' families confronted each other, it had nothing to do with us, because we knew very well what each other wanted since we were young. I want the throne of the secular world, but he has his eyes on the secular world. And the only thing that we brothers really want is to destroy your Tang Empire." Xian Jilong shook his head and said, "Desire is endless. Even if you have your eyes on the secular world, you are not willing to abandon the prosperity of the secular world. Otherwise, why would the West Hill Divine Palace do such things in the human world? And there is already a blood feud between your clansmen, which cannot be forgiven. One day, you will regret today's decision." Long Qing had been silent until now, and then he said, "You are indeed a wise general of the Tang Empire, known for your wisdom. Even when you are about to die, you still do not forget to leave a nail in our hearts." Crown Prince Chongming said, "Even if there is a day when we fight, I will not regret today's choice. You Tangs have never been defeated for thousands of years. You don't know how crazy that feeling of humiliation is. For hundreds of years, you have humiliated us, and today, it will become the power to destroy you. For this purpose, whether it is me or Long Qing, we are willing to give everything." "Destroy the Tang Empire?" Xian Jilong laughed and looked at the Yin brothers. He said with emotion, "After all, you have overestimated yourselves. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace are all dead. I believe that the strength that you have accumulated for many years has all been used in this battle. In the end, you can only die with us." Crown Prince Chongming's face became a little gloomy. He knew that Xian Jilong's judgment was right. In order to annihilate all the cavalrymen of the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, the Yin Kingdom had paid a heavy price. After the battle last night, although the thousands of terrifying black armored cavalrymen of the Tang Empire could no longer appear in the world, the casualties of the Yin army and the grassland cavalrymen were almost 10 times that of the enemy. What was more shocking was that the more than 1,000 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace, which he and Long Qing relied on to win the battle, were all annihilated by the exhausted Tang cavalrymen in the final battle. Could such a painful victory really be called a victory? I know what you want to say. You want to say that there are still many soldiers of the northeast border military who have not entered capital Cheng. But I regret to tell you that I did not bring all the grassland cavalrymen into capital Cheng. Now those grassland cavalrymen are working together with the allied forces of the Song and Qin kingdoms to kill your troops. And by now, you should have judged that the number of papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace is definitely more than 1,000. Yes, the total number of papal cavalrymen has exceeded 10,000 as early as 5 years ago. Now that the people of the Yin Kingdom are united, and we have such strong support, why can't we destroy the Tang Empire? Prince Longqing looked at Xian Zhilong and said, "For thousands of years, you Tangs have bullied the weak and enjoyed all the glory because of your strong army. Have you ever thought that there would be a day when you would be defeated so badly? Everyone will die one day. No matter how strong an empire is, it will be destroyed one day. I don't know when the history of the Tang Empire will end, but it will not be now, and it will not be ended by the Yin Kingdom." Xian Zhilong said, "The world calls the Tang army an invincible army. In fact, this is wrong. The Tang army will also suffer defeats. Even when we fight with the Yin Kingdom, we will lose sometimes. We are never as invincible as the rumors say, but we will always win in the end." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 710. There were many people like Xian Zhilong who believed that the Tang Empire would win in the end. Some had died in the battle last night. Some were still fighting. One of the Tang generals chopped off the neck of a Yin guard. He was the commander of the Northeast Border Military Vanguard Battalion of the Tang Empire. His name was Sheng Yongli. His name was very auspicious, especially for a general. No matter if it was the former emperor or great general Xiahou, they all liked to see his name on the battle reports. Thus, his name appeared more and more frequently on the battle reports. He firmly controlled the strongest heavy cavalry in the Northeast Border Army. Of course, even if he was the illegitimate son of the emperor, he could not have risen to such an important position in the army with just his name. Sheng Yongli was good at fighting and winning. That was the key. He had killed many enemies on the battlefield in his life, including the Yin Kingdom, the Song Kingdom, the barbarians of the Left King's Palace, and the desolate man returning to the south. But thinking about it now, he realized that the number of enemies he had killed last night was not even as many as he had killed last night. The archway collapsed and the vanguard battalion was ambushed. He rushed forward with his spear, and changed his blade when his spear was broken. His right arm was hammered and his shoulder armor was deformed, so he changed his padao to his left hand. The padao had collided with the bones of the grassland cavalry and the Yin army, and there were many cracks on it. Then he saw the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. He led his subordinates and continued to charge forward, continuing to kill. He did not remember how many enemies he had killed. He only remembered that the proud papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace were left with fear and despair. He only remembered that all the enemies who dared to stand in front of the vanguard battalion had become corpses. The killing lasted until daybreak. He had also killed his way from the archway to the palace. This memory was very bloody, but it made him feel very happy. Blood kept flowing from the wound on his head and spread to his eyes. Sheng Yongli's vision had become blood red. The Yin Imperial Palace was full of autumn trees. It was no longer beautiful, only bloody. He was very tired. But thinking that the general's order had not been completed, he dragged his injured right leg, and used the padao to support his heavy body, and continued to walk into the palace. Sheng Yongli did not look back. He knew that his subordinates who had followed him into the palace had all died. Because he did not hear any footsteps behind him, Sheng Yongli didn't care. He continued forward. Suddenly, a few flashes of light appeared in Bloody's vision. It should be other soldiers of the Tang Empire, who had broken into the imperial palace, and wanted to take advantage of the chaos, to set the palace on fire. Unfortunately, after a series of battles, there were too few comrades who could break into the imperial palace. The fire was quickly put out by the palace guards and eunuchs. Sheng Yongli shook his head regretfully. Then he saw a scarlet palace gate. He had no idea where he was. He tucked half of the padao under his armpit, and pushed the heavy palace door open. Behind the door was a side hall. There were many panic-stricken palace maids and eunuchs in front and behind the side hall. Seeing the Tang soldiers covered in blood, the palace maids and eunuchs screamed. The screams of the eunuchs were even more shrill and miserable than those of the palace maids. Sheng Yongli was taken aback and put the padao back into his hand. Seeing an old man in bright yellow clothes behind the eunuch and palace maid, he subconsciously felt that he was seeing things and rubbed his eyes. When his fingers left his eyes, they were covered in blood. Some brave eunuchs screamed and picked up a wooden stick to hit him. Sheng Yongli wanted to swing his padao, but he found that all his strength seemed to have been used up the moment he pushed open the palace gate. He could not lift his arm. With a dull thud, the wooden stick in the eunuch's hand hit him hard on the forehead. There were already 2 deep wounds on his forehead, and a lot of blood flowed from them. Therefore, even with the addition of the rod, it didn't seem to change much. However, the strength of the rod caused his vision to turn dark, and he almost fell. Sheng Yongli was about to fall, but he stared at the old man in bright yellow clothes on the stone steps and refused to fall. He stared at the old man. The only old man who could wear bright yellow clothes in the Yin Kingdom's imperial palace could be the Yin Emperor. After a whole night of fighting, he finally broke into the imperial palace and found the Yin Emperor. He was about to complete the order given by the general, but he had no strength and was about to die. Sheng Yongli was very unwilling. He was very unwilling. The Yin Emperor had been seriously ill for many years and could die at any time. He was kept alive by the imperial doctors and precious medicines sent by Chang'an City. Now that the emperor was dead, why was this old man still alive? Sheng Yongli roared angrily. Then he used all his strength to throw the half of the padao in his hand at the old man in the distance. With the injuries on his body, he should have died long ago. The reason why he did not die was because he had been holding his breath. There was not much strength left in his body. The padao broke through the air and flew crookedly. It did not touch the Yin Emperor's body and fell down. It bounced a few times on the ground and almost hit the Yin Emperor's toes. The Yin Emperor had been seriously ill for many years and was besieged by the Tang army. He was so shocked that he could not think clearly. Seeing the Tang army throw a flying knife at him like a blood demon, he did not even see where the knife landed. He only heard a crisp sound and was so scared that his face turned pale and his lips turned black. He clutched his chest and collapsed into the eunuch's arms. "You scared the hell out of me," the Yin Emperor screamed and stomped on the ground. Then he closed his eyes and stopped breathing. Screams and cries rang out in the side hall. The eunuchs and palace maids fled in all directions. No one cared about the Yin Emperor's body. In a panic, a palace maid overturned an oil lamp, and the gauze curtain suddenly ignited. Sheng Yongli looked at the scene in front of him, and it took him a while to understand what had happened. He muttered to himself, "He was scared to death? You call this the emperor?" After saying this and completing the military order given by Xian Jilong, he finally felt tired and pain. He slowly sat on the ground and closed his eyes with a satisfied smile. Sheng Yongli, the commander of the Tang Northeast Border Military Camp, had won the last victory of his military career. The news of the Yin Emperor's death quickly spread from the palace to the prince's mansion. Looking at the billowing black smoke in the direction of the palace, Xian Jilong was quiet for a long time. Then he laughed out loud. His laughter seemed especially presumptuous and happy. "Even if it was an ambush, even if Her Highness and I fell into your trap, you still have to exchange the emperor's life and the palace for destroying the Northeast Border Military." Crown Prince Chongming's face was livid. Long Qing was silent. Xian Jilong looked at the two quietly. His eyes were unusually cold. He said, "This is not enough. I can tell you now that in the future, capital Cheng will be massacred by the Tang army." Long Qing said, "There will be no Tang Empire in the world, and naturally there will be no Tang army. Her Highness and I are indeed the sinners of the Tang Empire. But do you really think that the Battle of Capital Cheng can decide everything? Destroy the Tang Empire? Just you?" Xian Jilong looked at the crowd and said sarcastically. Then he pulled back his sword and committed suicide. For the final victory, there are still 2 days before the double monthly votes. Well, let's update more tomorrow and the day after. Don't wait until the double to fight. Fight every day. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 711. I discovered a particularly scary problem. After I changed the input method, it automatically recognized something. Then I didn't pay attention to it. As a result, during this period of time, all the versions of myself have been typed into myself. I replaced them in the manuscript and found more than 500 places. I really can't change them in the VIP chapter. I'm ashamed, please ignore them. The next chapter will be right away. Crown Prince Chongming's face was very pale. His hands were slightly trembling in his sleeves. He looked at the half-ruined and half-scorched palace and wanted to say something, but he could not say anything. This ambush was carried out completely according to his and Longqing's plans and arrangements. Before the ambush, they had expected that the desperate Tang army would inevitably launch a desperate counterattack. However, no matter how they thought about it, no one could have imagined that the Tang army's counterattack would be so terrifying and the Yin kingdom would pay such a heavy price. Father passed away, the palace was burned, and the elite combat power that had been accumulated for years was almost used up in this war. In the end, they only got the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, which was 1/6 of the enemy's strength. Was it really worth it? I didn't lie to Xianjilong. Half of the cavalry of the left king's palace are now in the eastern states and counties, preparing to kill the remaining Tang army. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace are indeed more than 10,000. Longqing said after a moment of silence, I admit that I still underestimated the combat power of the Tang army. If the commander of this heavy cavalry was not Xianjilong, but the original Xiahou, perhaps we would have been prisoners now. But I still believe that the Tang Empire will perish. What we have done is worth it. Crown Prince Chongming looked at him and said, Why are you so confident? Longqing said, Because this is not just a matter of the Yin kingdom, but a matter of the world. Haotian wants the Tang Empire to perish. Who can stop it? Xianjilong left most of the troops, except for the heavy cavalry on the way back to the east. Correspondingly, Prince Longqing had also put a lot of effort into this area. In addition to his grassland cavalry, the allied forces of the Song and Qi kingdoms, the prefectural armies of the Yin kingdom, and more importantly, more than 1,000 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace joined the war. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace and the grassland cavalrymen joined forces and successfully split up the northeast border military of the Tang Empire. The Tang army did not have the protection of the heavy cavalry, so they decided to break up and cross the blockade line to return to the Tang Empire. If this was an ordinary battlefield, the response of the current generals of the Tang army would not be too much of a problem. The problem was that this was not an ordinary battlefield, but the land of the Yin kingdom. The feud between Tang and Yin was extremely deep. The land in the northeast of the Tang Empire was forcibly taken from the Yin Empire many years ago. Between the two countries, wars would break out every once in a while. In recent years, General Xiahou had been in charge of Tuyang City, and his actions had become increasingly ruthless and cruel. The northeast border military's massacre in the Yin territory was too bloody. In the eyes of the Yin people, the Tangs were all evil invaders. In the eyes of the people of the East Yin, every Tangs were demons that should be sent to the underworld. Thus, the chase turned into a tragic civil war. All the people of the East Yin were mobilized. Even though they knew that the most likely outcome of encountering the Tang army was death, there were still many young men who went into the mountains and fields with sticks and farming tools to look for traces of the Tang army. They reported it to the government as soon as possible, and then passed it on to the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace and the grassland cavalry. Tens of thousands of the Tang army, after being separated and surrounded, scattered themselves, and then were surrounded again. Gradually, they formed countless small teams and struggled through the mountains and forests of the East Yin toward the Tang territory. Some of the Tang soldiers fell into the traps set by the hunters of the Yin kingdom and were coldly abandoned. Some Tang soldiers were found looking for food by the strong men of the village and were beaten to death by hundreds of people with sticks. On a peak somewhere in Kunshan County, several Tang soldiers looked at the people of the Yin Kingdom, who were gradually searching toward the peak. Their expressions gradually changed from anger and confusion to calmness, and then they began to tidy up their equipment. A Yen man shouted angrily at them from dozens of feet away. When you killed the women and children of the Yin Kingdom, did you ever think that the Tang people would also be like stray dogs today? An arrow flew over and accurately hit the throat of the Yen man. A Tang soldier put away his bow expressionlessly and said coldly, "When two countries are at war, it is either you kill me or I kill you. I have killed 17 Yin soldiers in my life. How can you get back at me?" The people of the Yin Kingdom who surrounded the mountain were in an uproar, and then became even more angry and hateful. A white-haired old man shouted sternly, "Don't be afraid, everyone. They have limited arrows. The Song family village killed 3 Tang cavalrymen last night. How can we, the hundreds of men of the Chen family village, not be able to deal with these Tang thieves without horses?" The Tang soldier who shot the arrow was a low-ranking officer of this small team. The rest of the team had died on the road to the west, and now only the 4 of them were left. He looked at the excited Yin people who were approaching with farm tools in their hands. He frowned slightly and began to shoot arrows with his subordinates. After shooting the arrows, he pulled out his knife. When he was exhausted, he looked at the Yin people and said, "Idiots." Then he led his subordinates and rushed off the cliff to their deaths. In the Battle of Capital Chung, the most elite black armored cavalry of the Tang Northeast Border Military was destroyed. This was the first time in many people's memory that the Tang Empire had suffered such a heavy loss. It was also the first time that the invincible black armored cavalry of the Tang Empire was destroyed on a large scale. The whole world was shocked. The death of the Yin Emperor and the burning of the Yin Palace, which should have been more shocking, were completely forgotten. In the eyes of the people, it was worth it to destroy the black armored cavalry of the Tang Empire. The news spread to the West Hill Divine Palace as fast as possible. The solemn black Divine Hall of Judgment reverberated with a very strange and depressing atmosphere. The red-robed priests and the black-robed deacons of the judicial department knelt on the ground and did not dare to breathe. The destruction of the Tang army was, of course, excellent news for the West Hill Divine Palace. Prince Longqing, who had returned to Taoism, had made such a great contribution to the West Hill Divine Palace, which made many people in the judicial department excited. However, the current owner of the Divine Hall of Judgment was Yi Hongyu. People in the Divine Hall of Judgment did not know what the great Divine Priest of Judgment would think about this matter, especially about the great contribution made by Prince Longqing. Yi Hongyu sat on the seat of heavenly black jade, like a pearl inlaid in an ink stone. The blood-red divine robe of judgment on her body was like a red cloth wrapped around the pearl. She really did not expect that Longqing would do such a big thing. She also did not expect that she did not receive any news from the beginning to the end of the battle in Capital Chung. This meant that there were still loopholes in her control of the judicial department, and the hierarch lord still did not trust her. At this moment, she recalled that 2 years ago, she accepted Ning Kei's request and went thousands of miles north to kill Longqing. At that time, Crown Prince Chong Ming was the commander of the Yin Kingdom's military, but he did not respond in time, which made her very unhappy. Now that she thought about it, it was natural that the 2 brothers had put on such a good show in front of the world. Looking at the red-robed priests and black-robed deacons kneeling in the hall, Yi Hongyu slightly raised the corner of her mouth. She knew what these people were thinking, and also knew that they were afraid of her anger. But why would they be angry? Yi Hongyu stood up from the seat of heavenly black jade, looked at the crowd and said, "Get ready, everyone. It seems that it will not be long before the cavalry of the Divine Hall will appear in the Tang Kingdom." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 712. The battle in Capital Chung shocked the world. Of course, the Tang Empire was the most shocked. The atmosphere in the court was particularly tense. The Queen's faction, which had been silent for a few days, straightened their bodies and stared at the bead curtain behind the throne. Her Highness, Princess Liu, was behind the bead curtain. The ministers did not hide the anger in their eyes. The northeast border military of the Tang Empire had been wiped out. Nothing like this had happened for many years. How could the proud Tangs bear it? Now the streets and alleys of Chang were full of discussions about this and accusations against the new emperor and the princess regent. Xian Zhilang was pushed to the position of the great general of the north by Her Highness. His decision to join forces with the Yan army was also Her Highness's plan. Now that they had suffered such a crushing defeat, who would be responsible if not Her Highness? The Tang Emperor, Li Huiyuan, looked at the ministers' faces and eyes. He was so angry that he almost broke the armrest of the throne. He wanted to send the Yulin royal guards to kick them out, but thinking of his sister's words, he suppressed his anger and looked at Mo Han, the Grand Secretary of the Hall of Wenhua. The Yan Imperial Palace was burned, and the Yan Emperor was killed. I don't want to argue for General Xian Zhilang and the soldiers of the Northeast Border Military. I just want to say that they did not embarrass the Tang Empire. Mo Han said with a gloomy face. If any minister wants to criticize the soldiers who died for the country, please forgive me for cursing his relatives on the spot. This sentence was vulgar, but it was actually very shrewd. Even if the ministers of the Queen secretly scolded Xian Zhilang and the generals of the Northeast Border Military, no one dared to say anything in the court. Heroes could not be insulted. Those soldiers had died for the country, but there were still people alive who needed to be responsible. The minister of the Ministry of Rights stepped out and bowed to the bead curtain. He said calmly and directly, I think that the responsibility for the battle in capital Cheng lies with Your Highness. What do you think? The court was silent. Everyone knew that the Queen's faction would not let go of this opportunity. But not many people, including the officials of the Queen's faction, could think that the minister of the Ministry of Rights would directly say this and not give the emperor and the princess any chance. After a while, Li Yu's voice came from behind the bead curtain. All responsibility lies with me. Once the war is over, I will pay with my life. But before that, my lord should clearly consider what the most pressing matter for my great Tang is. The atmosphere in Chang was very depressing because of the defeat at the front line, especially because it was a crushing defeat that many Tangs had never seen in their lives. Although there was no gloom, when the Tangs discussed this matter, they were mostly angry. Anyway, not many people were in the mood to drink and have fun. But the building of Pines and Cranes was still brightly lit today, because a rich guest had booked the entire restaurant several days ago. After the court session was over, the guests gradually arrived, and the liveliness began to return. Chengjing has suffered a crushing defeat, and the soldiers of the Northeast Border Military are fighting for their lives in foreign countries. But you and I are meeting in a restaurant. Although a righteous heart is not afraid of right and wrong, and good wine can nourish the soul of heroes, beautiful women are out of the question. Master Zheng Jing still refuses to come? At this critical juncture, how can he be at ease in the residence, planting flowers and weeding weeds? Everyone has their own ambitions. Don't force him. Tonight in the building of Pines and Cranes was a gathering of the officials of the Empress faction. They probably thought that there was nothing to hide, so they did not try to hide it. The minister of the Ministry of Rights looked at the people at the banquet and frowned slightly. He said, the main issue of today's gathering is the eastern border. Do you have any opinions on what Her Highness said in the court session? An official sneered and said, pay with my life? How is this different from the vows of a shrew in the marketplace? Her Highness has stayed with the barbarians in the wilderness for a long time. How did she learn this trick? The minister of the Ministry of Rights rebuked. What nonsense are you talking about? Shut up. The official apologized, but he still did not let it go. He said, I would like to ask you, in the history of the Tang Empire, is there a precedent of an emperor or a governor paying with his life because of a defeat at the front line? Since there is no such precedent, what does Her Highness mean? In order to shut the mouths of the people? After the war is over, Are we really going to interrogate her and ask her to die? This is preposterous to the extreme. The Taichung Temple Chancellor stroked his beard and said after a moment of thought, "But Her Highness's actions can at least dispel the grievances of the soldiers. Now that the country is in a crisis, His Majesty and Her Highness's next measures are appropriate. It is safe to move the troops of the Gushan Commandery and the northern military camp to the east." The previous official sneered and said, "It is just a way to cure the headache and cure the foot. Who doesn't know how to be a tinker? If you ask me, the eastern border is empty, and we can also use the Southern Expedition Army. Her Highness has decided to use the 3 states of the Gushan Commandery. Everyone knows that she wants Hua Shanyue to defeat the Yin army and win back some face for her." The minister of the Ministry of Rights heard this and frowned even more. He said, "The Southern Expedition Army is far away at the edge of the forest, separated from Qinghe Commandery by mountains. They can only go around the Shannon Road, which is a long journey. By the time the Southern Expedition Army goes to the eastern border and fills the gap left by the northeast border military, the Yin army will have already fought their way to Chang'an." The official was startled and did not say anything more. Lord Li said something earlier, and I think that's the main point. Now that the country is in a crisis, all disputes should be settled in the court. The Tang Emperor and his ministers should work together to fight against the foreign enemies. The minister of the Ministry of Rights looked at the people at the banquet and said earnestly. Someone said worriedly, "But when will the Empress and the 6th Prince return to Chang'an?" The gathering at the building of pines and cranes ended quickly. The officials on the Empress's side finally decided to keep quiet for the time being and wait for this difficult period of time to pass before discussing other matters. However, from the attitude of the officials, including the arrangement of the imperial court for the defense of the eastern border, and the anger of the people in Chang'an, it could be seen that the current Tang Empire, from the emperor to the ministers to the ordinary people, still believed that the Tang Empire would not lose, even though they were sad and angry about the result of the battle in capital Cheng. Zhuge Warren had already resigned from his position as the director of the Imperial Center Administration. He also attended the gathering at the building of pines and cranes. However, this person was usually a bit sinister and ruthless, so no one was willing to deal with him. Now that he had already resigned from his position, inviting him to the gathering was already out of respect for the Empress. Who would say anything more to him? Zhuge Warren was very clear about what the officials thought of him. He did not show any resentment, but was more silent than usual. In his opinion, these officials only knew how to talk and did not know what was important at the moment. Why did the Tang Empire's army suffer a crushing defeat? Why was the country in a crisis? It was precisely because the siblings in the palace were in an improper position and were extremely stupid. As long as they could welcome the Empress and the 6th Prince back, the Tang Empire would be at peace, and all the problems would be solved. After leaving the building of pines and cranes, Zhuge Warren did not return to his mansion. Instead, he walked in the direction of the imperial city. He knew that there were always cultivators following him in the Southern Gate Temple after he resigned, so he did not deliberately hide his whereabouts. Anyway, the place he was going to was not a place that anyone could enter. He went to the Imperial Palace's Imperial Guard office. Su Chongshan was now the chief of the Imperial Guard office of the Tang Empire. This calm elder, who had dealt with Ning Ke many times, was still as simple and amiable as before, until he saw Zhuge Warren's face that was like a poisonous snake. "Zhuge, isn't it a little inappropriate for you to appear here again?" Su Chongshan looked at Zhuge Warren and said with a slightly solemn and vigilant expression. Zhuge Warren said, "I think no matter how inappropriate it is, it can't be more inappropriate than you appearing here." Su Chongshan frowned and said, "I don't know what nonsense you are talking about." Zhuge Warren smiled and said, "I mean, there is nothing stranger than a master from the devil's doctrine becoming the chief of the Imperial Guard office of the Tang Empire." Su Chongshan's eyes slowly narrowed, and a cold light flashed through them. Zhuge Warren did not seem to see his reaction. He walked straight to the chair and sat down. He lifted the front of his robe to shake off the non-existent dust and said calmly, "Sometimes when I think about it, I really admire you people. You are obviously cultivating the skills of the devil's doctrine. But how can you hide from so many people and become a martial arts master?" General Xiahou seemed to have obtained some kind of skill from the West Hill Divine Palace. "Did you learn it too?" At this moment, Su Chongshan became calm. He poured a cup of tea and slowly drank it, but he did not pay attention to him. Zhuge Warren looked at him and continued to praise. "The devil's doctrine is really powerful. They were wiped out by Mr. Ku and chased around the world by the West Hill Divine Palace, but they still managed to retain so many people. The person who made this plan back then should be the legendary Divine Lord Lotus, right? Tsk. If this bigwig could live until now, and if General Xiahou was not killed by Ning Ke, wouldn't the Tang Empire's palace be completely under your control?" Su Chongshan smiled and said, "You know that no matter what you say now, no one in Chang'an will believe you, so you can tell me why you are here." Zhuge Warren slowly stopped smiling and stood up. He stared into his eyes and said, "I don't know what the Empress has to do with the devil's doctrine, but I am very sure that both Xiahou and you are on the Empress's side. I am also on the Empress's side, so we should work together to do something." Su Chongshan fell silent and said after a moment, "What do you want to do?" Zhuge Warren said, "Since you are on the Empress's side, then you should know very well what you want to do." Su Chongshan said slowly, "You want me to die?" Zhuge Warren said, "Now that the desolate man is about to be exterminated and the Tang Empire is also destroyed, there is no place in the world that can accommodate the remnants of the devil's doctrine. Since you are going to die, why not die meaningfully?" Ma Shixiang stood on the mud wall and looked at the sky. The sky in the wilderness was very gloomy, and it had been like this for many days. It looked like it was going to rain, but it never did. The news of the northeast border military's annihilation in the Yin territory had already reached the city of Wei. The coffin of the former emperor was still in Helan City, and no one knew when the empress and the little prince would return to Chang'an. The entire sky of the Tang Empire was covered with dark clouds. Just like the city of Wei, no one knew when the storm would come. Ma Shixiang looked very solemn, but not because of the difficult situation the Tang Empire was facing. He was just an ordinary low-level general at the frontier fortress, and he had no right and no way to worry about the entire empire. He was ordered to guard the city of Wei, so he had to worry about the city of Wei. There are also some that I revise after eating and then update. Saving manuscripts doesn't seem difficult, but when I update 2 or 3 chapters every day, I'll find that the food I've saved up for a few autumns is gone. That feeling is really empty, so anxious. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 713. The city of Wei seemed to be as peaceful as before, but something worried Ma Shixiang. Recently, there were only a few caravans passing through the city of Wei. Although the continuous rainstorm made the grassland soft and muddy, it still felt strange. What alarmed him the most was that, according to the reports of the riders, the horse gang that had been entrenched in Shibi Lake for years had suddenly disappeared without a trace. No one knew where those damnable guys had gone. When Ning Ke was still in the city of Wei, the 7 stockade villages cleaned up Shibi Lake most frequently and got the most income from collecting firewood. However, even in those years, the horse gang was still reluctant to give up Shibi Lake. The last time the horse gang left Shibi Lake was because of the black horse carriage. It was because Ning Ke and the girl took a look at the city of Wei from afar. Then why did they disappear this time? Was it because of the rainstorm? However, although the forest by Shibi Lake showed signs of loosening, there were no signs of landslides. The bold horse gang would never abandon their nest because of fear. Ma Shixiang walked down the low mud wall, greeted the soldiers and vendors in the city, and walked back to the shabby military tent. He was silent for a long time as he read the military intelligence report sent by the Northern Military Camp yesterday. Time gradually passed. The tent flap was lifted, and a lieutenant covered in dust hurriedly walked in. Ma Shixiang's eyes suddenly lit up. He suddenly stood up and said, "What did they say?" The captain shook his head and said, "Kaiping said that the military intelligence had already been sent to the northern military camp. The other 6 stockade villages also found something strange, but there was no reply from the northern military camp. Some of the northern battlefront army followed His Majesty to the eastern wilderness. Now they are still in Helan City, and there is no news from them. Now the imperial court is going to send troops to Tuyang City for defense." Ma Shixiang looked at the summary of the military intelligence and frowned deeply. He continued, "The great general's mansion is now focusing on the eastward march. I'm afraid they have neglected the military intelligence reported by their subordinates." The captain asked, "Then what should we do?" "That's not what I'm most worried about," Ma Shixiang said worriedly. "What I'm most afraid of is that if the main force of the northern battlefront army is transferred to the east, the Golden Tribe Royal Court will launch an all-out attack from the south. Even if the general's mansion can react, they won't be able to stop it." The lieutenant's expression immediately became extremely nervous, his voice trembling as he said, "All these years, the royal court's cavalry has only dared to invade and harass us. How could they be so bold as to send their entire army south?" Ma Shixiang said calmly, "The Dean and His Majesty have passed away one after another, and the court is in turmoil. Now the northeast border military has suffered heavy losses. The palace cavalry is like a pack of hungry wolves. When we are strong, they do not dare to move, but when we are weak, they will bare their fangs." The captain asked, "General, what should we do?" "Salad. I'll ask chef to make a plate of bitter lettuce salad tonight. I'm a little angry these days." Ma Shixiang stood up and walked out of the tent, saying, "Also tell everyone to raise the alert level to the highest. I remember there are still a dozen guns in the warehouse. Take them out and clean them. Be careful of open fire." In the gloomy moment before the storm, the highest military commander of the city of Wei at the border of the Tang Empire was giving out orders, as if he was assigning chores, ordinary and meticulous. He would retire next year and return to his hometown to embrace his grandchildren. He did not want to see another war more than anyone else, but he knew better than anyone that no one could escape when the war came. Fortunately, he had seen many wars and seen many deaths. Although he vaguely knew that this war would be very different from the past, he was still very calm and slept soundly. In the early morning, Ma Shixiang was awakened by the emergency warning. He still had time to wash his face, put on his armor, wiped his sword and tightened his bow. Under the protection of the soldiers, he came to the wall of the city of Wei in high spirits. The morning sun had already left the ground, and the wilderness was bathed in a warm red light. The clouds that had covered the city of Wei for many days had finally dispersed. However, the people in the city of Wei did not feel a trace of warmth when they saw the scene in front of them. Countless cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court bathed in the morning light. They covered the wilderness outside the city, like a pack of black wolves. It was impossible to count their number with the naked eye. Ma Shixiang squinted and looked at the king's flag in the depths of the Golden Tribe Royal Court's cavalry. He suddenly smiled proudly and said, "We happen to be on the route of Chanyu's army. Old Wei and the others will envy me to death." The Tang soldiers on the wall of the city of Wei knew that Old Wei was the military commander of the Kaiping market. He had been suppressing the general all his life, and the general often gossiped about him. If it was any other day, they would inevitably make fun of him. But today, no one could laugh out loud. Their faces were very pale, and their hands holding the hilts of their sabers were a little cold. Ma Shixiang stopped smiling and asked seriously, "Have you prepared the horses I asked you to prepare the day before yesterday?" An aide replied from the side, reporting to General, "Everything is ready." Ma Shixiang asked, "Are they the best horses?" "Yes." "Are they the best riders?" "Yes." "One to report to the Kaiping market." "I think Old Wei is about the same. One should be enough." Ma Shixiang said seriously, "4 to report to the northern military camp, and the other 4 to report to Chang'an. Remember to change horses without stopping." Now the whole Tang Empire needs your speed. The 9 Tang soldiers who had been selected in advance answered loudly. Ma Shixiang looked at the scene outside the city of Wei and said indifferently, "Tell the people in Chang, and to forget about Prince Long Qing and those bastards in the east. The real enemy of the Tang Empire is coming." The 9 Tang soldiers left from the rear of the city of Wei, with dozens of the best horses in the city of Wei to carry out their mission. Ma Shixiang looked back at the owner of the restaurant, the laundry auntie, and the small number of residents under the wall. After a moment of silence he said, "I'm sorry. I have the responsibility to protect the people, but I'm afraid I can't protect you today. You can either leave or hide in the cellar. Believe me, the Tang army will come back one day." The adjutant asked, "General, the enemy is strong. What should we do next?" All the soldiers in the city of Wei looked at Ma Shixiang. Ma Shixiang's gray hair was flying in the morning wind. "We have to protect the gate of the Tang Empire." Yes. The cavalry of the Golden Palace, outside the city of Wei, began to move. The entire wilderness began to shake. The mud walls of the city of Wei kept shaking, and the accumulated dust fell down. The dense grassland cavalrymen swarmed over like a tide, drowning the city of Wei in an instant. In the autumn of the 18th year of Tianqi era, the northeast border military of the Tang Empire was destroyed. Chang An wanted to transfer a part of the northern army to Tiang City to resist the invasion of the Yan army. At this moment, the Golden Palace, which had been quiet for decades, mobilized all its forces and invaded the Tang Empire. The Tang army in the 7 stockade villages fought back bravely, but the enemy was strong, and they were defeated one after another. The grassland cavalry continued to move south, and the vanguard was directed at Chang'an. A friend asked, "You said you want to work hard, but there are so few chapters every day. What's the point?" I said the day before yesterday that I'm saving chapters for the double monthly votes the day after tomorrow. No matter how much I can save, I'm working hard. Then I said that Ning Ke hasn't appeared for a long time. It can't be helped, because this story has nothing to do with him, and he can't appear all over the world. He is not the eldest brother, and he can't do the limitless state. Of course, he can't disappear forever. This is his story. I've set the stage for him, and he will come out the day after tomorrow. There will be 2 chapters tomorrow during the day, and the first chapter of the double monthly votes the day after tomorrow. Then, there will be many chapters during the day after tomorrow. I hope everyone will be satisfied, and I hope everyone can hold the monthly votes. Then, let's see if you want to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 714. The news of the Golden Tribe Royal Court's invasion spread across the world like wildfire and shocked the entire Central Plains. Chang'an reacted very quickly. Li Yu suppressed the uproar of the ministers of the Queen's faction with great courage. She did not care that she might become a laughingstock later, and issued several military orders. She ordered the Northern Battlefront Army, which was moving towards Tuyang City, to retreat immediately. Together with the Northern Military Camp, they formed 2 lines of defense outside Hebei County. At the same time, she ordered the Southern Battlefront Army to stop fighting with the savage tribes in the primeval forest, and to rush to the northern border of the empire as soon as possible. At the same time, she ordered the Western Battlefront Army to move north along the Pamir Mountains to harass the Golden Tribe cavalry that was invading the Tang Empire. What shocked the ministers the most was that Li Yu did not care that Chang'an might be out of control. She even sent the Yulin Royal Guards that she had the most control to the northern border. At the emergency court meeting, all the ministers admitted that Her Highness's arrangement was selfless and timely. But there were still people who strongly opposed it. In the ministers' view, the Northern Battlefront Army could not support Tuyang City, which meant that the Yan army and the cavalry of the left king's palace could march straight in. Her Highness had also sent the Yulin Royal Guards to the northern border. What would Chang'an do then? The northern battlefront army's morale would definitely be damaged after so many setbacks. It was better to go to Tuyang City according to the previous decision, and leave the task of defending against the Golden Tribe royal court to the other armies. Li Yu used only 2 sentences to settle the dispute. Chang'an will never be conquered. Even I am not afraid of death. Why should you be? After the new emperor ascended to the throne, Li Yu had always been kind and gentle. The reason why she would change her attitude and show her absolute toughness at this moment was because she knew better than anyone else how terrifying the Golden Tribe royal court was. She used to marry the talented Chanyu of the Golden Tribe royal court and lived in the wilderness for a long time. She knew that the grassland cavalry that had been quiet for many years was the real threat to the Tang Empire. Until now, her guards were still the barbarians that she brought back from the wilderness. She knew very well that the Golden Tribe royal court was a monster that had been suppressed by the Tang Empire for hundreds of years. If the Tang Empire could no longer suppress it, it would unleash unimaginable destructive power. Compared to the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court, the cavalry of the left king's palace was like a child, while the Yin army was like a crying girl. Under the terrible pressure of the Golden Palace's southward invasion, Li Yu had no interest in paying attention to the army led by Prince Longqing. She was very clear that the vast territory of the Tang Empire and the local armies of the various prefectures would exhaust them. Other than some losses to the people, it would not affect the overall situation. Therefore, even though the officials of the Empress faction opposed it, even though even her most loyal subjects carefully expressed their doubts in private, she still insisted on mobilizing the entire empire's forces to the north. The facts of the future would prove that her current decision was correct. However, at that time, not many people could understand her decision. After the court meeting ended, she also felt extremely tired. A faint fear slowly rose from the deepest part of her heart. Was this her retribution for tampering with her father's edict? At this moment, there was a noise outside the hall. She frowned slightly, but before she could say anything, she saw several officials led by eunuchs hurrying in. Li Huiyuan, He Mingqi, and the new director of Tianwu Agency also walked in from the side door. Everyone looked extremely serious. Li Yu was slightly shocked, but her expression did not change. She asked, "What happened?" He Mingqi glanced at His Majesty. Li Huiyuan walked forward and handed a letter in his hand to Li Yu. The official who came from outside the palace said in a trembling voice, "The West Hill Divine Palace has just issued an edict." The edict from the West Hill Divine Palace, together with a letter from the Hierarch Lord, was sent to Chang'an. In the edict, the West Hill Divine Palace exposed the identity of the Empress and pointed out that the Tang Emperor had protected the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine for decades, which was a blasphemy against the filthy country. 2 generations of the Academy were punished by heaven because they disrespected Haotian, so the Divine Hall called for the whole world to attack the Tang Empire. It also said that the Golden Palace went south under the order of Haotian. They advised the believers of the Tang Empire not to resist, but to overthrow the Dark Royal family. After reading the edict from the Divine Hall, Li Yu began to read the letter from the Hierarch Lord. Compared with the Divine Hall's ornate letter, the Hierarch Lord's handwritten letter to her was much simpler. There was only one sentence written on it. "The night covers the stars, the Tang Empire is restless, Your Highness surrender." She was silent, and her fingers holding the letter kept trembling. The hall was quiet. Li Huiyuan looked at his sister nervously. He Mingqi slightly lowered his head. The eunuchs and palace maids were pale, and the officials widened their eyes. If the Golden Palace going south was the strongest enemy that the Tang Empire had encountered in decades, then the edict from the West Hill Divine Palace and the letter from the Hierarch Lord were the things that the Tangs were most afraid of. Yes, there was no country in the world that could defeat the Tang Empire. Even the Golden Palace. As long as the Tang Empire could survive the initial period, they would eventually win. However, if the whole world began to attack the Tang Empire, could the Tang Empire withstand it? Many years ago, the Tang Empire had faced a similar situation. But at that time, The Tang Empire had the headmaster, and now the headmaster had ascended to heaven. Any other country would have collapsed in the face of such terrible pressure and desperate prospects to attack a country with the whole world's power. The Tang Empire did not collapse. The confidence and strong spirit that had been tempered for 1,000 years made the people living here vigilant and uneasy, but they still did not have the idea of giving up. All the institutions of the imperial court took action as fast as possible. Chang'an was in a state of solemnity. All kinds of military orders were sent from Chang and to every region of the vast territory. In contrast, the imperial palace, the political and military power center of the Tang Empire, became quiet. Everything that should be done was being done. What else could they do but wait? Li Yu stood by the stone railing and looked at the moon in the night sky. She was silent. She thought of the words in the letter written by the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and the instructions made by the imperial astronomer many years ago. She slowly clenched her hands behind her back. Her nails cut her palms and stained them with blood. She took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed the fear and confusion in her heart. She turned around and walked around the side of the hall. She walked across the small lake and entered the imperial study. She had never entered the imperial study since she changed the edict and let Li Huiyuan ascend the throne. This was because this small room was filled with her father's scent, and she felt a little stifled. However, she still came today because she needed her father to give her spiritual comfort and support. A military general walked into the imperial study and saluted. The war had not affected Chang'an yet, but the whole empire was facing a war. It was no longer a time of peace but a time of war. When will General Su Shi arrive in Chang'an? She looked at the general and asked. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chitian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 715. This general was not one of Li Yu's or the empress's but Su Shi's. He did not know why the princess would ask such a question. After a moment of silence he replied, Since there is no edict, the general is naturally still in the south. It is better to be honest at this time. If I am not wrong, General Su Shi has already started his return journey after the news of father's death reached Nanzhao. Li Yu said, Now is not the time to pursue these things. I want you to tell the old general that Chang and the empire need him the most now. The West Hill Divine Palace has ordered the world to attack the Tang Empire, and it will definitely be disadvantageous to him. The old general must be careful. The general did not expect the princess not to blame the military for acting on their own, but to give him such an instruction. He said, Please rest assured, Your Highness. The general will definitely return to Chang'an safely. Hearing this, Li Yu's mind finally relaxed a little. Next, the eunuch brought Censor Song into the imperial study. The censor had nothing to do with military or political affairs, but Li Yu summoned him because of military and political affairs. This was because Censor Song was the liaison between her and the warlords of Qinghe County. The imperial court has already called back the Northern Army. The Western Army and the Southern Army have also received military orders. They will soon head north to resist the cavalry of the Golden Palace. The West Hill Divine Palace has been planning for many years. The South Jin Emperor's pain of losing his son has not subsided. There will definitely be an army coming from the south. To stop them, we can only rely on the navy on the Great Lake and the warlords of Qinghe County. The things that Li Yu had mentioned were all arranged by the imperial court. There was no problem of secrets being leaked. She looked at Censor Song quietly and said, I will not forget my promise to the warlords of Qinghe County. I also hope that the warlords will perform well at this time. I am looking forward to the arrangements that the warlords will make in the West Hill Divine Palace. Censor Song knelt down on both knees without hesitation and bowed deeply. He said sincerely, Please rest assured, Your Highness. The 100,000 state troops of Qinghe County and the 30,000 Zhuang troops of the warlords will definitely cooperate with the navy. We will fight to the death to stop the Divine Hall and the South Jin Kingdom's army from the south of the Great Swamp. Even if we lose in the end, We will definitely buy enough time for the Empire. Very good. Li Yu looked at him quietly and said. After Censor Song left, Grand Scholar Mo Han of the Hall of Illustrious Persons walked out from behind the bookshelves. He looked at the tightly closed door of the imperial study and said with a little worry, if there is a defender general of the state in Chang'an, both the military and the people's morale will be further stabilized. I'm still worried about Qinghe County, although the warlords have surrendered for many years. Don't worry. The clan spent so many resources to push Huiyuan and me to this position. Even if they have other ideas, they can't change their direction in such a short period of time. Otherwise, the strong tearing force will cause great problems within the clans. Li Yu did not wait for him to finish. She said coldly. Moreover, the descendants of the warlords, including Elder Chui's second son and a few grandsons, are all in Chang'an. How can they be disloyal? Mo Han thought for a moment, and felt that there were indeed no loopholes in Her Highness's arrangement. However, the worried expression on his face was still not completely gone. He asked, is there still no movement from the academy? Li Yu was silent. Suddenly, she picked up a paperweight from the table and threw it on the ground. With a crack, the paperweight broke into countless pieces. She could not suppress the anger in her heart. Her body trembled as she said, the academy is still closed. The Tang Empire has nurtured the academy for thousands of years. Now that the empire is in danger, are they still not willing to help? At this moment, a eunuch outside the imperial study said something softly. Li Yu's anger had not subsided. She ordered him to leave. The eunuch's voice trembled slightly, but he did not leave. He continued to say that someone wanted to see Her Highness. Hearing that person's name, Li Yu was stunned. Mo Han frowned slightly and said, Your Highness, you can see him yourself. I will leave first. The person who entered the palace that night and insisted on seeing Her Highness was Cao Xiaoshu. No wonder neither the guards nor the chief eunuch dared to ask him to leave. They didn't even dare to report it. Li Yu looked at the middle-aged man in a green robe under the autumn tree. After a moment of silence, she said, a few days ago, I specially invited second Uncle Cao to the palace, but he ignored me. Why do you want to see me today? Cao Xiaoshu said, a few days ago, Your Highness wanted to see me about politics. I told His Majesty that I would not care about politics of the Tang Empire, so I was unwilling to enter the palace to see you. Li Yu frowned slightly and asked, then why are you willing to see me tonight? Cao Xiaoshu said, because this is no longer about politics. It concerns the safety of the Tang Empire. Li Yu said, second Uncle Cao, please speak directly. Cao Xiaoshu said, I want to ask for 2 imperial edicts. Li Yu was a little surprised and asked, imperial edicts? What do you want to do? Cao Xiaoshu said, an imperial edict to the fish dragon gang. If Chang'an is stirred up by the Taoists of the West Hill Divine Palace, the brothers in the gang can help His Majesty to suppress it. Li Yu looked at him quietly, as if trying to see if there was any hidden meaning in his words. She said, Chang'an will not be in chaos, so I think there is no need for this imperial edict. Cao Xiaoshu looked at her and said, is Your Highness really confident that Chang'an will not be in chaos? Li Yu said, there is the Chang'an local government, the bodyguard office, and the Valiant Cavalry Battalion in the city. Without waiting for her to finish, Cao Xiaoshu said, the second imperial edict I want to ask for is related to the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. I hope that His Majesty or Your Highness can grant me temporary authority to lead the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. Li Yu's frown deepened. She did not understand his request and said, I have already promised that Chang'an will not be in chaos. No matter how annoying those officials loyal to the Queen are, I will not do anything to them before we solve the external problems. So what do you want the Valiant Cavalry Battalion for? I want to leave with the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. You want to leave Chang'an? That's right. Cao Xiaoshu looked at her and said, you and I both know that all the military power of the Tang Empire has to be used to resist the Golden Palace and the West Hill Divine Palace's army heading north. A part of it needs to be left to keep an eye on the Yueluan Kingdom. Now that the northeast border military has been destroyed, the imperial court can no longer find any troops to resist the Yin Kingdom's army. Li Yu shook her head and said, "There are still prefectural armies in the Gushan Commandery and other states." Qiao Shaoshu said, "The prefectural army moves slowly and cannot keep up with the speed of the grassland cavalry." Li Yu said, "The grassland cavalry from the eastern wilderness is not dangerous. Even if we let them enter the country, they will not affect the overall war situation. But the people in the east of the Tang Empire will be killed, kidnapped and burned alive." Qiao Shaoshu looked at her quietly and said, "I know what you are thinking. If we allow those grassland cavalrymen to invade, the more they rob, the more they kill, the more they burn, and the more they break military discipline, the slower they will act. Like greedy bears, they will eventually be too tired, and even have no desire to eat anymore. Therefore, they will not be able to threaten Chang, and then the Tang Empire's most prosperous vital points." Li Yu asked coldly, "Is this not right? Losing the old, the weak, the women, the children, the ordinary people and burning the fields, villages and dilapidated cities can save an army. It may be able to exchange for 1,000 years of peace for the Tang Empire. If you look at it this way, of course it is right. It can even be called a wise decision and a calm response." After a moment of silence, Qiao Shaoshu said, "But the Tang Empire is not just Chang'an. The old, the weak, the women, the children, and the ordinary farmers are also people of the Tang Empire. Those fields, villages, and dilapidated cities are also part of the Tang Empire." Li Yu said, "So, you want to bring the valiant cavalry battalion to the east?" Qiao Shaoshu said, "Yes. If the former emperor was still alive, he would have done so long ago." Li Yu said, "Even if you know that the valiant cavalry battalion cannot change the situation in the east?" Qiao Shaoshu said, "At least, we have to let the people in that land know that the Tang Empire has not forgotten them." Li Yu was silent for a long time and then said, "I will not give you the first edict." Qiao Shaoshu said, "Thank you, Your Highness." When Li Yu was summoning everyone in the imperial study, her brother Li Huiyuan was also talking to someone in his palace. However, the conversation did not go well. Mingqi glanced at the dark night and turned to look at Li Huiyuan, who was livid. He said, "Qiao Shaoshu is in the imperial study now, but I don't know what he is talking about with Your Highness." Li Huiyuan waved his arms anxiously and scolded, "Those things will be arranged by my royal sister. Why do you care about those things? I just want to know if there is any way to contact the people from the West Hill Divine Palace." Mingqi bowed slightly and said, "Your Majesty, even if we can contact the West Hill Divine Palace now, it is impossible to change their mind. You have to know that the Divine Hall has already issued the edict, and the two sides have already fallen out." Li Huiyuan was stunned when he heard that. His face became more and more ugly, and his right hand kept shaking. He wanted to take a sip of tea from the teacup on the table, but he almost dropped it. "Think of a way quickly," he said. "If we can't contact the West Hill Divine Palace, then quickly find a way to contact General Su Shi. Tell him that the West Hill Divine Palace is ready to ambush him on the road." Mingqi was slightly shocked when he heard that and said, "Your Majesty, do you want this to be exposed?" Li Huiyuan slowly raised his head and stared at him fiercely. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Even if the military knows that I once tried to kill the Defender General of the state with the enemy, I will make it right. I originally thought that it was just Long Qing leading the grassland cavalry to disturb the border. Who would have thought that it would become a world war? I want to protect the Tang Empire and the Defender General. Do it immediately." Qiao Shaoshu left the palace. He did not take the imperial edict, but Li Yu's handwritten letter. Now that Li Yu was supervising the country, he had this letter, and the commander of the valiant cavalry battalion was his brother. So he was confident that he could take the valiant cavalry battalion out of Chang'an. After returning to the Spring Breeze Pavilion Street, the Chow Mansion began to hold a banquet and invited a theatrical troupe. At a time when the Tang Empire was in a precarious situation, this kind of behavior was really eye-catching. But no matter whether it was the guests who attended the banquet, Lindsay who was holding his child and crying silently, or old Master Chow, who was holding a walking stick and looking calm, no one raised any objections. This was a farewell banquet, a farewell banquet. Censor Song left the palace. He first went to the Qinghe County Guild Hall, according to Li Yu's instructions. He met with the descendants of the warlords of Qinghe County, and had a long talk with the second son of Old Master Chui. Then he brought the second son of Old Master Chui back to the mansion, and held a banquet. He invited more than 10 singers to join in the fun. After the banquet, Censor Song was dead drunk. The censor's wife served him lovingly and said, "Drunkenness is bad for your health. Moreover, you are the censor. I am afraid that people will attack you for doing such a thing at this time." Censor Song opened his eyes, and looked at the curtain on top of the bed. After a long silence he laughed and said, "There are many kinds of banquets. Farewell banquets, and farewell banquets. Tonight's banquet is for the palace to see. I want the palace to think that we are drinking wine to honor an old friend from our hometown. How can the imperial court be completely at ease with people like us from Qinghe County? Whether it is me or the second son of Old Master Chui, or even every descendant of the warlords in the Qinghe County Guild Hall. There are secret guards following us all year round. So in the end we will all die. Tonight's banquet is actually drinking wine to strengthen our courage. But for the sake of 1,000 generations, even if it is the wine of death, we have to drink it all." The night shrouded Shao Mountain. There was a military camp at the foot of Shao Mountain. It was made up of more than 10 military tents, but there were not many people there. In one of the military tents, there were continuous coughs of pain. Su Shi was already very old. Whether it was the wrinkles on his face or his worsening lung disease, they all proved this. But he did not allow himself to fall, especially at a time like this. He was the defender general of the Tang Empire, and the de facto leader of the military. He was deeply trusted and favored by the emperor. He had spent most of his time in the Southern Army, because the hot and humid climate in the south was good for his health. Shao Mountain was a few hundred miles away from the Southern Army, just a little north. The annoying lung disease relapsed again. The old general's chest was like a broken drum, causing all the guards in the camp to feel pain. In the battle for the throne, General Su Shi, whose words were the most powerful, had remained silent. Back then, because of his vigilance against the academy, many people, including Li Yu and her brother, had suspected that he secretly supported the empress. But it turned out that he did not support anyone but the emperor. When the emperor passed away, he supported the edict of the emperor. So now he supported Li Yu and her brother. However, when the imperial edict summoning him back to the capital did not reach the Southern Army, he suddenly felt that something was strange. He left the Southern Army, with more than 100 guards, and sneaked into the forest towards Chang'an. They spent the night at the foot of the mountain. Wang Jinglu once again questioned the decision of the general. Su Shi stared at him and shouted, "When a general is away from home, he should not obey the emperor's orders. Moreover, the emperor is gone." Wang Jinglu recalled this sentence, and always sighed with emotion. When one was old, it was easy to become like a child who liked to be angry. General Su Shi was in a hurry to return to Chang, and because he was worried about the state affairs. But thinking deeper, it was probably because he was in a hurry to see the emperor for the last time. At midnight, there will be an update. There will be a single chapter. That is the beginning of the double monthly votes. It will be the final battle for the annual monthly votes, and the beginning of the war for the Tang Empire. See you then. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 716. Wang Jinglu poured the foot-washing water out of the tent, and took a towel to wipe Su Shi's feet. He rubbed the old skin on the soles of the general's feet. According to my estimation, the imperial edict has probably reached the southern battlefront army by now. What if something happens to us if we sneak away like this, and violate the military discipline of the Tang Empire? I didn't leave with the army. These 100 guards are the private army that His Majesty gave me. They just came to the mountain to recuperate because of illness. How did they violate the military discipline of the Tang Empire? Even if I did, who would dare to punish me? Fine, just pretend I didn't say anything. Why is your temper getting worse and worse? Wang Jinglu said angrily. Su Shi was really like a child now. Seeing that he was angry, Su Shi smiled happily and comforted him. Don't worry. I'm the great defender general of the state. How can I be in any danger in the Tang Empire? At this moment, an urgent military report came from outside the tent. The army of the Golden Tribe Royal Court was marching south. The West Hill Divine Palace ordered the world to attack the Tang Empire. There was dead silence in the military tent. Wang Jingle's face was very ugly, and Su Shi's smile had long disappeared. He had returned to the dignified and calm demeanor that a military leader of the Tang Empire should have. Return to the southern battlefront army immediately. Su Shi glanced at the dark Shao Mountain outside the tent and said, if the new emperor and Her Highness didn't make a mistake, the order for the southern army to move north should have arrived by now. Wang Jinglu was slightly startled and asked, what about you? Su Shi said, since the whole world is going to attack the Tang Empire, of course I have to go to Chang'an. You don't have to worry. His Highness will definitely order me to return to the north as soon as possible. Wang Jinglu nodded, but he felt that something was wrong. Suddenly, he thought of something and frowned. Since the West Hill Divine Palace has issued an edict, they must want to harm you. Su Shi patted him on the shoulder with a smile and said, as I said before, this is the territory of my Tang Empire. Who dares to kill me, the Defender General of the state? Wang Jinglu said, is there anything the West Hill Divine Palace doesn't dare to do now? I've been in the army for decades. Don't you think I know better than you? Now that we are at the foot of Shao Mountain, if anyone wants to harm me, they will have to cross the mountains from Qinghe Prefecture. The people from Qinghe Prefecture are not blind. Su Shi smiled and said, also, you have to understand that although I'm old, I'm not that easy to kill. There aren't many people in this world who are qualified to kill me. Wang Jinglu thought that this was indeed the case. He counted with his fingers, but he really could not find anyone who could really threaten the old man. Although the old man was very old, he was still a very strong old man. The military situation was more important. Wang Jinglu had to bring back General Su Shi's latest military order. He also had to coordinate with the Southern Army to organize the North to resist the Jin. So he left the foot of Shao Mountain that very night. Not long after he left Pyrolite Mountain, Su Shi put on his military boots and armor. Then he walked out of the tent and looked at the forest in the night sky. He slowly narrowed his eyes. The guards in the tent heard the faint sound of armor and scabbards colliding. They walked out of the tent with extreme vigilance and came to the great general's side, asking what had happened in a low voice. Su Shi did not answer, but only looked at the night mountain quietly. He wanted to send these guards away just like he had sent Wang Jinglu away. But just like what he had said to Wang Jinglu before, these guards were the private army given to him by His Majesty. They were unparalleled loyalty and would never leave his side under any circumstances. There are indeed not many people in this world who are qualified to kill me. Su Shi looked at the quiet night forest and said slowly, the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace, the Devil's Doctrine 23 years cicada cultivation, the sage of sword Lu Bai, and those young world wayfarers. I always thought that these people would not risk their lives to kill me. I did not expect that you would come personally. A voice as loud and clear as thunder suddenly rang out in the night mountain. After the death of the headmaster of the academy and the Tang Emperor, you are the last spirit of the Tang Empire. If I don't do it myself, wouldn't it be too disrespectful to you? As soon as he finished speaking, the Shao Mountain shook, and the mountain rocks collapsed. A giant chariot appeared, crushing the rocks in the forest. The chariot was covered with layers of gauze. Even in the darkness of the night, one could still see the towering figure inside. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace had come personally. There were 64 West Hill Divine Guards beside the chariot. Before the Battle of the Wilderness, The hierarch lord had not left the Peach Mountain for many years. Now he has come deep into the Tang Empire and risked his life for me, a dying old man. I can't help but feel a little smug. Su Shi's voice was like cold steel, breaking through the wind and falling into the dark forest, exploding in front of the giant chariot. But I still want to know who will survive tonight. After saying this, he suddenly coughed twice. Wang Jinglu was running in the dark forest. Suddenly he stopped and looked up at the sky. There were clouds tonight. There was no night, and the sky was pitch black. At this moment it suddenly started raining. The raindrops fell on his face, making pitter-patter sounds. The rainwater flowed into his mouth, and it tasted a little salty and bitter. Wang Jinglu suddenly turned around and ran back the way he came. When he rushed out of the dark forest and came to the top of a cliff, he saw the forest in the distance collapsing, sand and stones flying. No matter how violent the night rain was, it could not hide the terrifying collision of the chi of heaven and earth. Wang Jinglu clearly felt the aura of General Su Shi. He felt that the general's aura was getting dimmer and dimmer. He knelt in the rain and shouted heartbreakingly, "No!" Only then did he realize that the general had vaguely seen the direction of fate. That was why he asked him to return to the Southern Army. In fact, he wanted him to avoid this earth-shattering battle. After the rainy night at the Spring Breeze Pavilion, Wang Jinglu joined the army and had been under General Su Shi's command. Over the years, he served the general like a nephew. He was used to loneliness since childhood and began to like the noise of the military camp. He even felt that General Su Shi was like his father. His chubby face gradually thinned, and his playful heart gradually calmed down. He gradually understood that compared to freedom, there were many other beautiful things in the world that were also worth cherishing. However, on this rainy night, those beautiful things were torn apart. Wang Jinglu knelt in the pouring rain and cried bitterly. After a long time, he stood up again and wiped the rain and tears off his face. His expression gradually became firm, and he turned around and ran to the north. He did not return to the Southern Army. He wanted to return to Chang, and as soon as possible. He wanted to tell the people of Chang'an, General Su Shi was dead. The terrifying powerhouse who killed the general was heading towards Chang'an, and Qinghe County had rebelled. The scenery of Qinghe County was beautiful and elegant. The houses had white walls and black eaves, high and low, and there were clear streams and stone bridges. It was very different from the magnificent scenery of other parts of the Tang Empire. The best scenery was still the Fujian River. The manors of the warlords of Qinghe County were all located on the banks of the Fujian River. The manor of the Cui family naturally occupied the most beautiful stretch of the river bank and the most beautiful forest. However, it was located in the southern wilderness. Although the forest was beautiful, it was far from steep. The small building in the depths of the Cui garden was still as dark as before. Old Master Cui handed a hot towel to his son behind him and looked at the 6 white-haired old men in the chairs. He sighed and said, "Haotian has mercy on us. Before we die, we can finally wait for this unprecedented change." One of the old men said calmly, "The so-called intentions have been set many years ago. The ancestors of the various clans have never forgotten about the restoration of the country. However, there are some details that still need to be carefully considered." Old Master Cui said calmly, "The specific matters will naturally be carried out by the descendants of the clans. We have lived in Qinghe County for many years. There will definitely be no problems." Eldest brother is right. However, there are many descendants of the various clans in Chang and city seeking to become officials. The Li family will definitely not give us a chance to take them out of the city. How should we deal with this? Her Highness Liu trusts us old men, not only because she thinks that we cannot withstand the tearing of a sudden change of direction, but also because she believes that we cannot bear to part with the flesh and blood of the clans. Old Master Cui said calmly. However, she does not know that the clans of Qinghe County have been wholeheartedly thinking about restoring the country since hundreds of years ago. It was not a sudden change of direction at all. She could not have imagined that in order to complete the great task of restoring the country, we would not hesitate to sacrifice hundreds of descendants of the clans, even if more people died. Old Master Chui smiled slightly as he looked at the complicated expressions of the white-haired old men. He said, "You do not have to be sad in advance. As long as the war goes smoothly, the Li family may not dare to kill our descendants for the sake of future plans. They may even take good care of them. But can the war really go smoothly? Haotian Taoism has been planning for many years. The Tangs are arrogant and extravagant. Now that the northeast border military has been destroyed, the Golden Palace has come south, and the Hierarch Lord has personally taken action. Su Shi will definitely die. As long as Qinghe County opens the door, the West Hill Divine Palace Army and the Jin Army can march north. Regardless of whether the Tang Empire is destroyed, Chang'an City will no longer be able to order us around. Speaking of which, we have to thank Mr. 13 of the Academy Ning Quebec. If not for him protecting the daughter of Yama, the headmaster would not have been punished by heaven. If not for him shooting the crown prince of the Yin Kingdom in the wilderness, the Yin Emperor would not have gone crazy and mobilized the entire country. Old Master Chui smiled and said, "In the future, when Qinghe County succeeds in restoring the country, we will build a stone tablet by the Fuchin River to record this grand event. When that time comes, do not forget to add Ning Kei's name." The joyful laughter of the old men rang out in the small building. The history of the families in Qinghe County was longer than that of most countries in the world. 1,000 years ago, this was originally a loose country where warlords took turns to rule. According to clan etiquette, the Chui and Song warlords had always maintained a strong cohesiveness, and Qinghe County was run by them like an iron plate. No matter how Chang'an City tried to separate them, they could only touch the outermost layer and could not penetrate deep into the core of Qinghe County. Today, Qinghe County and Yongguan City, from the city guards to the state army generals, and more than 1,000 middle and low-ranking officials, were either the children of the warlords or people who had a close relationship with the warlords. Even the Tang Navy, which was strictly monitored by the imperial court, had been infiltrated by the families in Qinghe County. This could not be blamed for Chang'an's lack of vigilance. When the Navy recruited soldiers, most of the people in Qinghe County applied. And rather than saying that the people in Qinghe County were Tangs, they were more like the servants of the warlords. As time passed, the ordinary Navy officers and soldiers, who were once inconspicuous, gradually gained relatively important positions with their experience and achievements. Although the high-ranking generals of the Navy were still appointed by Chang'an City and transferred from other places, the middle and lower levels of the Navy could no longer escape the control of Qinghe County. One day in the autumn of the 18th year of Tianqi era, it was still raining heavily in the west of Shao Mountain, but the sun was shining brightly in Qinghe County in the east, and the autumn wind was refreshing. The Yongguan City Guard's mansion summoned all the officials to discuss the important matter of gathering the army and cooperating with the Navy to resist the invading enemies from the south. All the officials responded to the order and arrived. After a few cups of tea, Zhong Dajuan, the military advisor of the Yongguan City Guard's mansion, walked in with a smile. The gates of the Yongguan City Guard's mansion closed. The officials looked at each other, not knowing what had happened. Zhong Dajuan waved his hand. There were angry rebukes and painful injuries in the Yongguan City Guard's mansion. Blood stained the bluestone tiles. Almost at the same time, the families in Qinghe County invited the Tang Navy to a certain place by the Fuchin River to discuss the war. Blood stained the Fuchin River. No matter how powerful the warlords of Qinghe County were, it was impossible for them to capture all the officials and generals who were loyal to the imperial court. Therefore, on that sunny autumn day, many battles broke out in Qinghe County and Yongguan City. According to the statistics, a total of more than 300 Tang officials were beheaded. More than 1,000 people from the Tang Navy, from the generals to the auxiliary soldiers, died, and more than 1,000 people were escorted to the coal mountain downstream of the Fuchin River to do hard labor. When it came to a rebellion, one side planned and waited patiently for 1,000 years, while the other side knew nothing about it. The outcome was already decided, and the only thing that could affect the outcome was the hearts of the people. The hearts of the people in Qinghe County were very complicated. They were used to the warlords being the real gods. They had an undisguised sense of superiority and contempt for the Tangs from other states and counties. They did not have any good feelings for Chang'an City, but after all, they had lived under the rule of the Tang Empire for so many years. They had experienced the glory of the Tang Empire countless times, and they were proud of it. Now they were going to betray the Tang Empire? The young people of Qinghe County, including some young descendants of the warlords, could not accept this at all. They could not believe what they were seeing. However, just as they were about to speak, their old grandfather and strict father appeared in front of them. They dragged them back to the ancestral shrine and made them kneel in front of the ancestral tablets. They began to tell the sad history of the fall of Qinghe County many years ago, reminiscing the glory of the old days, with tears streaming down their faces. The young people of Qinghe County did not forget that history, but they loved the Tang Empire more. They loved being proud Tangs, so the words of their fathers had no power over them. However, could they raise the swords in their hands and cut their own relatives? In the autumn of the 18th year of the Tang Empire's Tianqi era, the headmaster ascended to heaven. The emperor passed away. The academy closed its doors. The northeast border military was destroyed in the Battle of Capital Cheng. The Golden Palace went south. Qinghe County rebelled. The West Hill Divine Palace and the tens of thousands of troops from the South Jin Kingdom came, covering the sky. The defender general of the state, Su Shi, died in battle. Then, the army of the Yueluan Kingdom entered the Pamir Mountains. The whole world attacked the Tang Empire. The Tang Empire seemed to be doomed. At this moment, a young man in black was walking in the depths of the wilderness. He had just woken up. Every night after he woke up, he was talking to the moon. He missed his teacher and his wife. He did not know what had happened in the world. If he knew, could he change everything? It has begun. Let's begin. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 717. I heard the sound of a drum. After listening carefully, I realized that it was my heart beating. This wasn't an artistic expression, but rather a realistic situation. I was very nervous, unprecedentedly nervous, and also unprecedentedly excited. The doubling of monthly votes had finally begun. The final battle for the monthly votes had finally begun. At this time, there was no longer any need to describe my desire to become the champion of the monthly votes. I could only say that ever since I set my goal, I became incomparably resolute. I would continue to bring out my greatest effort and diligence to write more and more of Shogun's Knight, all the way until the final 3 days. Vote for Jiang Yi, vote for Qing Yunyan, vote for the spy, vote for Zhu Keiji. These votes would be counted in the total number of monthly votes. No matter which book has ever made you laugh or sad, or enriched or even angered, I'm here to ask for your support and to keep your monthly ticket. You can only cast 2 monthly votes a day, so please don't hesitate to vote for me in case you forget to do so. I won't let you down with these 3 days of updates. Today's first chapter has just been updated. I'll go to sleep now. If I can't fall asleep, I'll continue writing. I'll get up at 6 o'clock sharp tomorrow and start writing after eating. The second update started at 8 in the morning, then 1 chapter per hour. I'm also someone who has a stockpile of manuscripts now. Although it's not a lot, I can still hold on. But at the same time, I will continue to write desperately. Strive to maintain 1 chapter per hour. How many chapters will be updated today? I don't know. I'll write until I can't write anymore. I will update until I can no longer maintain 1 chapter per hour. It was said in the past that being the champion of the monthly votes was the greatest honor in the online literature circle. Therefore, the greatest honor was to be the champion of the annual monthly votes. If he wanted to obtain this glory, how could he succeed without fighting? In front of such a grand battle, I will display the grandest sincerity and determination. I offer you a cordial invitation to fight by my side. I earnestly ask you to cast your precious monthly ticket. Actually, I had revised this single chapter many times. Suddenly, I wasn't nervous anymore. Just like the last chapter said. Since it had begun, let's begin. We win together. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 7:18. There is nothing I can do to repay your kindness. Let's spend this day together. Looking at the moon in the night sky, Ninkei burst into tears. He only stopped when he realized that his cries were worse than the howls from afar. After he woke up, hunger took over his body and mind. His empty stomach was like the chi of heaven and earth at the back of the cliff of the academy, constantly squeezing and torturing him. Through the clear and terrible hunger, he confirmed that he had been unconscious for many days. No wonder he was so weak. He found some edible weeds from the grass and stuffed them into his mouth with rainwater. He chewed them until they were soft and swallowed them with difficulty. After a while he felt better. At this time, he did not know that after the headmaster of the academy ascended to heaven, it rained heavily in the human world. He looked at the water drops on the meadow and did not take it seriously. When the moon disappeared in the morning, Ninkei looked at the rising sun to identify the direction and started to walk south. He was now depressed and helpless. He did not know exactly where he was going. Then let's go back to Chang'an. His home was there, and so was the academy. Although there was no one in the old brush pen shop, or the house by the Yinming Lake, and the old guy could never return to the academy. After walking for a short while, he saw the mountains in the distance covered with snow. He walked in that direction and walked into the night, until the moon climbed into the sky. This kind of day repeated for a while. He walked along the mountain, and looked at the moon every night. Sometimes he would suddenly lose his temper, and curse at the bright moon with his hands on his waist. Ninkei knew that the headmaster should still be alive, but in a different form. He was still fighting against the evil heaven in the sky. The waxing and waning of the moon was probably the specific manifestation of the battle. But he still felt very sad and angry, because the moon did not look like the headmaster. A face like a full moon is used to describe a beautiful child. How does it look like you? Ninkei took out his padao and laughed at the headmaster in the night sky. He cut open the belly of a snow rabbit he had just caught and skinned it. The primordial 13 arrows and other weapons were all left with the black horse carriage by the Sishui River. Now he only had the padao with him. Sometimes he would worry about the big black horse. After cleaning the rabbit, he raised it in the air and said, "Don't burn it." He was asking Sang Sang to roast the rabbit. But there was no Sang Sang now. He lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Then he shouted again, "Sang Sang." When he woke up in the morning, Ninkei continued his journey south at the foot of the mountain. The snow-covered mountain was Tianqi Mountain. As long as one walked along the foot of the mountain to the south, he would reach Min Mountain, Chang'an, and the academy. On the way, he came across a small herdsman tribe. This herdsman tribe belonged to the Golden Tribe royal court. They recognized him as a Tang from his clothes and accent. Not only did they not invite him to dinner, but they also tried to kill him and take away his extraordinary padao. So Ninkei killed all the people in that small herdsman's tribe. After that, he ate a full meal of mutton and drank 2 bags of horse milk wine. He found a tent that did not smell of blood and had a good sleep. The fatigue and sadness that had accumulated over the past few days were finally relieved. When he left the village full of corpses, there was a boxwood bough on his shoulder, a horse under him, and a rope leading another horse with 4 legs of sheep tied to it. Another few days passed. Ninkei finally saw the famous gap in the Tianqi Mountains. However, he swallowed his shout of joy before it could leave his mouth. The expression on his face suddenly became very serious. Below Helan City were all the elite cavalries of the Golden Tribe royal court. Looking at the dark scene, There were at least a few thousand riders. What really shocked Ning Ke were the 4 carriages behind the grassland cavalries. With his keen eyesight, he could clearly see the gold, silver, and jewels inlaid on the carriages. He could also see the steel plates in the carriages. Those plates were all densely packed with lines. On each carriage stood several grassland powerhouses in full armor. The reason why he could confirm that those barbarians were grassland powerhouses was because their armor was not leather, but metal armor, which was extremely rare in the grassland. These grassland powerhouses were not the real protagonists. They were only responsible for protecting the plates and the people who used them. There was a skinny old man in each carriage. 3 of them were dressed in the bright clothes of the royal court, with necklaces made from human bones around their necks. Only the old man in the last carriage was dressed in ordinary grassland clothes, with no special decorations on his body. High Priest. Ning Ke looked at this scene and frowned. Although he had not seen the high priest of the grassland royal court on the battlefield, he had heard many descriptions of them by General Ma and other officers. The Tang army relied on array tactical masters and talisman masters. The grassland royal court relied on these wizards who could communicate with the chi of heaven and earth with the plates. They were respectfully called priests by the royal court. Only the priests who were truly powerful and could communicate directly with the grassland were qualified to be called the high priest and be given the precious metal disc. Ning Ke could not understand why the Golden Tribe royal court sent 3 rare high priests at once. And judging from the old man in the last carriage, he was afraid that his status was even higher than the 3 high priests. Is there any important figure in Chang and in Helan City? He did not think that the grassland cavalries and the high priest were attacking Helan City. No matter how powerful the high priest was, it would be difficult for him to break through Helan City, which had been modified with corresponding talisman arrays. As for the grassland cavalries without siege weapons, not to mention thousands, even tens of thousands would be useless. After the heavy rain stopped, before the people in Helan City could make a decision, the cavalries of the Golden Tribe royal court arrived at the city gate with the 4 strangely gorgeous carriages. Helan City had been besieged for many days. The atmosphere in the city was very depressed. At this time, there were more than 10,000 Tang cavalries in the city, as well as sublime people like Master Huang Yang and several powerhouses in the army. Logically speaking, it was impossible for the city to be besieged by thousands of grassland cavalries. But it was the truth. The Northern Battlefront Army had launched a fierce surprise attack when the Golden Tribe Royal Court's cavalries arrived at the city gate. That surprise attack was the closest to success among all the attempts. Because during that surprise attack, the high priests in the 4 carriages had just begun to use their skills. The grassland had long been soaked by the heavy rain. The 4 high priests of the Golden Tribe Royal Court had used some unknown method to make the grassland in front of Helan City softer and more muddy. The foundation of Helan City had been modified by array masters, so it was not affected by the high priests. But the grassland for miles outside the city had completely turned into a swamp. No matter how brave the Tang cavalries were, they could not do anything when their hooves were stuck in the grassland. They could not rush into the enemy's camp, and could only watch helplessly as the enemy shot at them. A few years ago, during the Desolate Man's first war in the south, the priests of the Left King's palace had used this trick. At that time, the military ministry sent a military order from Chang'an, asking the armies to discuss how to deal with it. The generals thought that the Tang cavalries were different from the Desolate Man. They were more mobile and would not be surrounded by a grassland. General Han Qing stood at the top of the city wall and looked at the dense grassland cavalry below. He looked at the 4 horse carriages and the corpses of the Tang soldiers. His face became extremely ugly and he said, "However, we have forgotten one thing. This kind of demonic magic is the most suitable to trap Helan City. And now it seems that these 4 wizards of the Golden Tribe Royal Court are obviously much stronger than the wizards of the Left King's palace back then." If it was in the past, Helan City had enough food stored. No matter how the Golden Tribe royal court besieged the city, the Tang army would not have any fear. But now the Northern Battlefront Army was also in Helan City, and the food in the city was already running out. It was very dangerous to be surrounded by the enemy. In my opinion, we have to make up our minds. We will go to the East Wilderness through the mountain gap, and then go around the north of Yin Kingdom to return to the country. That is the only way to avoid being trapped here. Han Qing looked at the Empress who was standing by the city wall, and said in a low voice. The Empress shook her head and said, Since Chanyu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court dared to attack me, and even invited the Nation Master, who had been in seclusion for many years, then his main cavalry must have gone south to invade the Tang Empire. What I am worried about now is the safety of Chang'an. The Empress still looked very calm. She said softly, If it is only the Golden Tribe Royal Court, Chanyu would not dare to go south. So the situation that the Tang Empire is facing now must be much more difficult than what we see. Maybe the whole world will go against the Tang Empire. Han Qing said. Then we should attack the Yin Kingdom. The East Wilderness is not peaceful. It will take too long to go around the north of Yin Kingdom. Besides, attacking the Yin Kingdom will not slow down the other enemies. What we need most now is time. We have to bring the Northern Battlefront Army back as soon as possible, because the Tang Empire needs this cavalry more than ever. The Empress turned around and looked at Han Qing and the two generals of the Northern Battlefront Army. She smiled and said, I know what you are thinking. You are thinking that the Northern Battlefront Army is running out of food and fodder. What can they do even if they go back now? You are wrong. If the Northern Battlefront Army stays in Helan City, they will be a burden and concern for the Tang Empire. But if we can go south and find food and fodder, we will be a force that our enemies will be afraid of. She said slowly. I don't know if Chang'an has thought of this. I don't know if the Northern Military Camp's food team was burned by the Golden Tribe Royal Court, or they did not come at all. But obviously, Chanyu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court has seen this clearly. That is why he is willing to pay such a big price to trap us here. After a moment of silence, General Han Qing asked, Then what should we do, Your Majesty? The Empress said, We have to break out of Helan City as soon as possible while we still have some food and fodder. Han Qing frowned slightly. The two generals of the Northern Battlefront Army also looked gloomy. They all understood what the Empress said. The problem was that the bodies of the Tang cavalrymen under the city wall proved how difficult it was. Killing the three priests is enough. The Empress looked at the foot of the city, and the four magnificent carriages behind the grassland cavalrymen. She slowly narrowed her eyes, and her voice seemed to become colder. Master Huang Yang, who had been silent, suddenly smiled and said, Or I can give it a try. The Empress shook her head and said, The grassland barbarians are too good at shooting. It is too dangerous for you. A general of the Northern Battlefront Army gritted his teeth and said, Your Majesty, I have several martial arts powerhouses under my command. If there are still clouds covering that shining thing tonight, let them try again. The Empress still shook her head and said, We have already tried twice. Since we failed, let's not try again. The lives of these soldiers should be more important in the future. Don't sacrifice them here for nothing. Helan City was silent. What should they do? At this time, the Empress was the most distinguished person in the city. The edict of His Majesty had stated that the sixth prince would inherit the throne. So the generals naturally followed the Empress's lead. However, in their eyes, the Empress was a weak woman after all. What could she do? The Empress smiled, as if she had recalled some memories from long ago. Then she said softly, I want to give it a try. Both Han Qing and the two generals of the Northern Battlefront Army thought they had heard it wrong. However, before they could react, they heard the wind blowing. The Empress's dress was fluttering on the city wall. The Empress leaped and jumped off the city wall. Han Qing screamed and tried to grab the Empress's dress, but he only grabbed the air. The two generals of the Northern Battlefront Army were scared out of their wits. They rushed to the city wall after a while. The people on the city wall all thought they would see the Empress die miserably. Han Qing cried and said, I should have known that the Empress would not be able to take the blow when His Majesty passed away so suddenly. I'm afraid she had wanted to follow His Majesty for a long time. But the Empress... The crying stopped abruptly. He looked at what he saw and rubbed his eyes until they turned red. He also felt that what he saw was not real. Seeing this, the two generals of the Northern Battlefront Army widened their eyes. Their hands fell on the city wall and almost crushed the hard stone bricks. Only Master Huang Yang still looked calm. The Empress jumped off the high city wall, but she did not die. She had not landed on the ground yet. She was still falling in the air. After a while, she would reach out her hand and press on the hard stone wall. She slowed down and her dress rose slightly. She looked like a dancing flower. After His Majesty passed away, the Empress had been wearing plain clothes. So she was like a plain flower. The Empress's feet finally landed on the ground. Her dress fell slowly. The ground outside Healan City was very soft like a swamp. The soles of her shoes slowly sank. The grass at the edge of his shoes also fell. She walked to the cavalryman of the Golden Palace in the distance. She looked calm, as if she was going to review the cavalryman of the Tang Empire. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 7:19. The further she went into the grassland, the softer the ground became, and the deeper the Empress's feet sank. But at the same time, she walked faster and faster. Her feet rose and fell on the soft and dangerous grassland so fast that the naked eye couldn't see her clearly. She left a shadow behind. The chilly air of the wilderness in autumn brushed past her cheeks and caused a shrill sound of wind. Her hair trembled slightly, and her plain skirt turned into a line as hard as iron. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe didn't realize what was going on until now. They were shocked and confused by the incredible scene they had just seen. They pulled their bowstrings desperately and shot sharp arrows. The arrows fell like rain, accurately predicting the Empress's speed and advance, and shrouding her figure. The corners of the Empress's mouth rose slightly. She kept moving forward with a smile. The sharp arrow carried a heavy force as it heavily shot into her body. With a crisp sound, the arrows broke in the middle. The torrential rain of arrows tore through her skirt, cutting through her fluttering hair, shooting deeply into the grassland. However, not a single arrow could inflict the slightest bit of harm to her. Looking at this strange scene, the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe became extremely shocked. Their hands became stiff subconsciously, and the speed of shooting arrows gradually slowed down. In the eyes of all the Tangs, the Empress was the mother of the country. In the impression of the people of Chang'an, the Empress was a gentle but skillful woman. She had been favored by His Majesty for more than 10 years. But no matter what impression they had, the Empress was always a weak woman. However, the Empress who appeared at the foot of Healan City in front of everyone was a general who launched a fearless charge to the enemy camp. Han Qing and the two generals of the Northern Battlefront Army woke up from the initial shock and looked at Master Huang Yang with complicated expressions. They were senior generals of the Tang Army, and they were all martial arts cultivators themselves. How could they not see that the Empress was actually a member of the Devil's Doctrine? Master Huang Yang looked at them and sighed. "What are you still doing here?" The three of them came to themselves and quickly walked down the city wall. The Tang army on the city wall didn't see the secret. Even if they knew, they wouldn't care. All they knew was that the Empress was charging at the damned cavalrymen of the Golden Palace. They were greatly inspired by the Empress' awe and waved the padeos in their hands, incessantly shouting and cheering for the Empress. Long live the Queen! Long live the Empress! The heavy gate of Healan City was slowly opened in the thunderous cheers. Inside the gate, the armored cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army were ready to attack, waiting for the last order. The Empress was very fast. She was so fast that she looked like a demon. When she rushed into the camp of the Golden Palace cavalry, Neither the sharp machetes nor the shrill arrows could touch her skirt. They could not even slow her down. She rushed to the south of the cavalrymen of the Golden Palace. Her body was like the edge of a long sword. She easily pierced through the defensive line of more than 100 cavalrymen of the Golden Palace and landed on the gorgeous carriage. With a light touch of her seemingly weak shoulder, the several grassland experts clad in metal armors were sent flying in all directions like stones smashed by iron hammers, falling on the ground of the wasteland in the distance. The old priest in the carriage was still expressionless. He looked at the empress who was so close to him. His bloody lips kept moving, and his fingers kept tapping on the metal disc. The empress knew that the priest wanted to release all his spiritual power through the disc to the ground in front of Healan City before he died. She wouldn't give him the chance. She reached out her delicate right hand and clenched it tightly. The empress's hand was small and soft. Even if she clenched it tightly, it still looked small, like the lovely white fruit of the magnolia. It was not threatening at all. Then her fist fell on the metal disc. The metal disc didn't break. The metal disc jumped up and hit the chin of the high priest heavily. The high priest's neck and lower jaw suffered a heavy blow and were completely shattered. He died in an extremely straightforward manner. Fresh blood flowed onto the metal disc and dyed the complicated lines red. After the empress killed a high priest, she was immediately surrounded by the crowd. The powerful grassland warriors who had been shaken away by her rushed back to the carriage and surrounded her with more cavalrymen. Master Huang Yang stood on the wall of Healan City and looked at the scene in the distance. He frowned slightly. Although he was not worried about the empress's safety, time was still running out. The national master of the Golden Palace in the last carriage had not made a move yet. Huang Yang took out a string of Buddha beads that he had been wearing since he was a child. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat some blood on it. Then he raised his wrist and threw the string of Buddha beads over the city wall. The blood-stained Buddha beads spiraled in the air and fell on the grassland dozens of feet away from the city wall. Because of the death of a high priest, the ground outside Healan City had become soft and muddy, although it had not become hard again. When Master Huang Yang's Buddha beads fell on the ground, a merciful yet violent aura of fire quickly spread around the Buddha beads. In his early years, Master Huang Yang traveled with a group of merchants in the depths of the West Wilderness. They encountered the merciless slaughter of horse bandits, and the blood of his companions flowed onto his body. The blood was very hot, burning hot, as if it was about to burn. It was at that moment that he was enlightened. His Dharma access was the fire of blood and fury. At this time, there were many corpses of the Tang soldiers lying on the muddy grassland in front of Healan City, soaked in blood. Master Huang Yang no longer calmed his anger with Dharma access. When the fire burned, the water would dry up. Even the thin yellow mud would become hard bricks. The grassland was drying up at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then it gradually solidified. Looking at the changes in the wilderness, General Han Qing shouted and raised the padao in his hand high. He squeezed his horse's abdomen and led hundreds of Tang cavalrymen out of Healan City. They rushed towards the cavalry of the Golden Tribe. Behind them, there were still thousands of Tang cavalrymen waiting to follow them out of the mountain gap. The Northern Battlefront Army had been trapped in Healan City for many days because of the terrible rainstorm. After the rain stopped, they were besieged by the grassland barbarians. Their morale was low and they were tired. However, when they got back on their familiar horses and held their padao hilts, their spirits and morale instantly returned to their bodies. The hoofbeats were like thunder, and the Tang cavalrymen were full of vigor. Han Qing commanded the Tang cavalrymen to divide into 3 iron streams and charge toward the other 3 carriages guarded by the grassland cavalrymen. He led his subordinates and rushed to the south without hesitation. The carriage of the grassland cavalrymen to the south had been destroyed. From a tactical point of view, there was no point in charging there. However, for Han Qing, that carriage was very important, because the empress was still there, being besieged by the grassland barbarians. He had no time to think about whether the empress was a remnant of the devil's doctrine. He only knew that he was the emperor's servant, And the Empress was the Emperor's woman. How could he watch her die? The Empress was blocked by the grassland cavalrymen. Since she married the Emperor, she had not practiced the skills of the Devil's Doctrine for many years. However, as the former saintess of the Devil's Doctrine, she had enough genuine qi in her body. She would not be in any danger in a short time. The pair of white jade-like fists were like two hills. The grassland cavalrymen who came into contact with them either neighed and fell to the ground, died from broken bones, or were thrown far away. Only the few true grassland experts were able to put up a slight resistance. But she was not satisfied. Looking at the luxurious carriage deep in the enemy's formation, and the ordinary old man in it, she frowned in the cold wind of the wilderness. If she could not kill the legendary national master of the Golden Tribe, or force him to retreat, then everything would be over. The Empress waved her right hand and hit a cavalryman, who jumped down with the machete into the air. She quickened her pace and walked toward the carriage with a determined look and a faint smile on her lips. The ordinary old man was the national master of the Golden Tribe royal court, who had been living in seclusion for many years. He saw the Empress of the Tang Empire walking toward him and guessed her intention. His old face did not show any panic. Instead, he slowly raised the corner of his mouth like the Empress, revealing an indecipherable smile. Then the old man reached behind him and lifted a blood-colored curtain hat to cover his face. When the curtain hat was lifted, the national master's face suddenly became gloomy. No one could see that his face was getting older and thinner. Only his slightly bright eyes could be seen. They were so tranquil and deep. The national master looked at the Empress who was walking toward him. The Empress met his eyes and suddenly felt that she had fallen into a bottomless abyss. Her face suddenly turned pale and she groaned. She forcibly suppressed the raging waves in her sense of perception and continued to move forward. But at this time, her steps became extremely heavy and her body felt weak. The national master took off the blood-colored curtain hat and looked at the Empress who was besieged again. He smiled and then ignored what was happening in the south. He pointed to the city of Helan and signaled the two high priests to continue. The two high priests sped up their incantations. Their skinny fingers flicked on the metal plate faster and faster, as if they were beating a drum. The bone necklace in front of their chests became whiter and whiter. The blood color on the surface of the Buddha beads that fell on the ground of the wilderness gradually faded. Master Huang Yang, who was on top of the city wall, spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face became extremely gloomy. His Buddha fire was destroyed by the national master and the two high priests, and he immediately suffered internal injuries. When the blood on the Buddha beads finally faded, the ground of the wilderness changed again. The solidified ground became soft and muddy again, at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Tang cavalry noticed the change of the ground, but the heavy cavalry could not stop their charge. If they stopped, they would be crushed by their companions behind them. It was even more terrible than sinking into the mud. They could only continue to charge desperately, hoping that they could rush into the camp of the Golden Tribe cavalry before the ground completely softened. But everyone knew that it was just wishful thinking. When the breakthrough of Helan City was about to end in failure again, and it was very likely that they would lose the Empress and the most elite cavalry, there was a sudden commotion outside the battlefield. More than 10 cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe covered their throats and fell off their horses one after another. In their hands, there were bloody arrows tightly. This is the third chapter. Today there will be one chapter every hour, until we can't stand it anymore. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 720. With the whistling of the arrows, more and more Golden Tribe cavalrymen fell. Just as the cavalry leader was waving his machete, trying to find the hidden archer of the Tang army, A cloud of dust came from the north and rushed into the Golden Tribe cavalryman like a lightning. The man on the horse turned his wrist and unsheathed his padao. He cut down several Golden Tribe cavalrymen in an instant. Then he stepped on the stirrup and stood up. No one could see how he moved, but the padao in his hand was replaced by an ordinary boxwood bow. He exerted strength in his arms, bent the bow, and shot an arrow at the high priest on the northernmost carriage. In front of thousands of cavalrymen, the man shot as he pleased. No one could stop him. What was even more shocking was that the man was standing on the horse, but the arrow did not deviate at all. With a dull thud, the arrow fiercely shot into the shield. The high priest listened to the sound of the shield in front of him, and his face turned pale. He silently thought that if it were not for the protection of the warriors of the Golden Tribe, the arrow would have pierced a big hole in his chest. The arrow was blocked by the shield, but the man did not stop. He lowered his waist and abdomen on the horse, transferred all his strength to his feet, and stomped down heavily. The stirrup broke. The leather rope broke. The man's huge strength was transferred to the horse, and with a whine, the horse's 4 hooves were torn apart, and it fell heavily on the ground of the wilderness, causing a cloud of dust. With the recoil of the force, the man jumped up from the horse and rushed to the carriage in the north. His body broke through the air, stirring up the wind. He was only a little slower than the arrow. The tail of the arrow was still swinging on the shield, making a buzzing sound. The warrior of the Golden Tribe royal court, who was holding the shield, did not have time to withdraw his arm. The high priest behind the shield was still pale, and he was still afraid of the power of the arrow. The archer arrived. He clenched his right fist and punched the shield that was half the height of a man. Several deep cracks appeared on the shield. The warrior of the Golden Tribe royal court, who was holding the shield, twisted his arm. The shield followed the momentum of the punch and smashed heavily into the body of the high priest. The high priest's sternum collapsed, and his lungs were crushed into mush under the heavy pressure. He had no time to recite any spells or crush the bone necklace to summon his life-saving measures before he was shocked to death. The empress heard the tragic cries and sorrowful shouts coming from the north and suddenly turned to look. She saw the young man standing on the carriage. Her black hair brushed past her gentle face, concealing her astonished expression. She did not expect to see Ning-Ke here. Ning-Ke saw the scene when the empress turned around. For some reason, he suddenly felt a sense of loss. Then, he turned to look at the carriage at the very back, and at the plainly dressed old man in the carriage. At this moment, he did not know that the old man was the legendary nation master of the Golden Tribe royal court. But his intuition told him that the old man was the most important figure on the battlefield. Therefore, he decided to kill this person first. The nation preceptor did not know who this person who had suddenly appeared from the north, killed a high priest in an instant, and was about to change the entire situation of the battle. However, he knew that this young Tang person was very powerful. Therefore, he also decided to kill this person first. Ning-Ke dashed towards the carriage. The nation master reached behind him and lifted his blood-red curtain hat. Ning-Ke was still hundreds of feet away from the carriage. The nation master's gaze outside the dark curtain hat had already fallen on him. Their gazes met. Ning-Ke's sense of perception was suddenly in turmoil. Only then did he know that this old man was a terrifying psyche master. He had been meditating since he was young, so his psyche power was strong, which was rare in the world. After the trip to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, he had Master Lotus consciousness fragments in his sense of perception, so he was not afraid of a battle of psyche power. Ning-Ke had never lost a battle of psyche power. Whether it was Dao Shi in the steam in front of the bun shop in Chang'an, the treasure tree on the mountain path, or Qi Nian in the Lank Temple, these powerhouses of the Buddhism sect who were famous for their psyche power could not defeat him in this aspect. He did not believe that a barbarian psyche master in the wilderness could defeat him in this aspect. Ning-Ke did not hesitate to mobilize his psyche power, turning it into a sky full of stones and bombarding the raging waves in his sense of perception. Two extremely powerful psyche powers met in the grassland that was invisible to the naked eye. Ning-Ke let out a muffled groan, and fell heavily to the ground. Blood kept flowing from his mouth and nose. The nation master's body shook slightly, and then recovered. Ning-Ke looked up and stared at the seemingly ordinary old man. His eyes were filled with shock. There was actually someone in the world who could injure him with just psyche power. He could even suppress the consciousness fragments of Lotus in his sense of perception. In this psyche battle, Ning-Ke was on the losing end and was seriously injured. But his psyche power was also very strong. Coupled with the help of Lotus consciousness fragments in his sense of perception, the nation master of the Golden Tribe was also greatly shaken. The Empress felt it the most clearly, because the mental energy that had always seemed to be there and not there, that had always been echoing in her mind, suddenly disappeared without a trace. The feeling of weakness left her body, and her heavy footsteps became light again. She slightly raised her eyebrows and quickly mobilized her genuine chi. She leaped forward, pulled out the belt from the waist of her plain dress, and swung it forward. Genuine chi was injected into the soft belt, and it suddenly became extremely tough. It flew against the wind and broke through the air, piercing the great priest of the Golden Tribe, who was in the other carriage. The warrior in the carriage shouted and held the big shield in front of the belt. Seeing that the belt was about to hit the shield, the Empress's fingers trembled slightly. The front of the belt suddenly became soft again and bent like a willow branch. It went around the edge of the shield and touched the great priest's throat lightly. The great priest covered his bleeding throat and fell backward. The three great priests were all dead. The grassland in front of Helan City gradually returned to normal. Looking at the Tang cavalry treading on the mud, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court seemed a little chaotic. They only heard a very low shout, and then a sharp whistle. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe quickly regrouped and stopped fighting with Ning-Ke and the Empress. They covered the last carriage and went deep into the wilderness. Before the nation master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court left, he looked at Ning-Ke and the Empress and said a few words. Ning-Ke and the Empress were very afraid of the old man's horrifying state and did not chase after him. The Tang cavalry whizzed past them and chased after the retreating cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. It was not a good time to chase after them, but at least they had to create a safe zone outside of Helan City. What did he say before he left? The Empress asked. She had read many of Ning-Ke's files and knew that he knew many languages in the wilderness. Ning-Ke said after a moment of silence, "The old man said that the grassland is a place where life and death circulates. The great priest of the Golden Tribe is not afraid of anything except those who cultivate the devil's doctrine. He has been living in seclusion for many years and heard that the devil's doctrine has withered. But he did not expect to see two powerhouses from the devil's doctrine in Helan City today. The two powerhouses from the devil's doctrine were naturally referring to the two of them." The Empress and Ning-Ke looked at each other. Were they really the same? Fourth update, please cast your monthly vote. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to cast your recommendation vote or monthly vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 721. The Tao in same way did not only refer to diabolism or cultivation. The Empress had read Ning-Ke's files many times in order to deal with him, because he had killed her only brother Xiaohou. The relationship between them was very complicated, and the emotions that reverberated between them were very subtle. Back in Helan City, the subtle emotions still reverberated between Ning-Ke and the Empress until he entered the quiet room in the attic and saw the gray coffin. The coffin was very big, made of dozens of pine trees from the Tianqi mountain cliff. The bark on the pine trees had not been peeled off, so it looked too simple and crude, especially compared to the status of the person lying in the coffin. Ning-Ke was silent for a long time, and then he walked to the pine coffin and knelt down to greet the Empress. The Empress said calmly, "When you saw him in the palace, you never liked to kowtow. Now that he is dead, he can't see it no matter how many times you kowtow." Ning Kai stood up and reached out to gently touch the rough bark of the pine tree. He did not say anything. The empress had thought that he would smile and say that the dead should be respected as he used to. Then she could mention the dead Xiahou and continue to go deeper into the more serious topic. Ning Kai stood beside the pine coffin for a moment, and then he looked at Master Huang Yang and several generals. He said, "What is the situation now? Why are you staying in Heilin City?" The headmaster and His Majesty passed away one after another. It rained heavily, and the Northern Battlefront Army was forced to stay in Heilin City. Then there was no news. "We don't know what is happening in the south, but we can guess something," Master Huang Yang said slowly, and then he told them what had happened these days. Since the Golden Palace dared to besiege Heilin City, then Chanyu must have led the army to the south. Ning Kai broke off a small piece of bark from the pine coffin that was slightly burnt by the candle. He squatted on the ground and drew a very simple map. He drew a horizontal line at the bottom of the map and said, 7 stockade villages. He suddenly became silent, and his fingers stopped drawing. The room was quiet. People knew that Ning Kai came from the city of Wei, which was a frontier fortress in the Qiqing stockade village. The expression on Ning Kai's face did not change. He continued calmly, "The 7 stockade villages must have been breached. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe has even passed through Pingling Pass and is heading straight for Hebei Prefecture." He threw away the bark in his hand, looked up at the crowd and said, 1/3 of the Northern Battlefront Army's cavalry are in Heilin City. Does the North Military Camp have enough soldiers to defend? If Chang'an City mobilized troops from the Gushan Commandery, or even Tuyang City, what would happen to the eastern region? Longqing will definitely not miss this opportunity. His speculation was slightly different from the actual situation, but the conclusion he reached was not fundamentally different from the reality, and was completely in line with the Empress's view. "We must leave immediately," the Empress said. "Retreat to the south as fast as possible." Han Qing said, "The journey is long. What about the provisions?" A general of the Northern Battlefront Army said, "Let's collect firewood along the way. We just need to rob a few more Golden Tribe tribes." Ning Kai shook his head and said, "The Golden Tribe Royal Court must have made arrangements. Their elites must have gone south, and the central part of the wilderness is empty. They will definitely not give us a chance to take advantage of them. Those tribes will probably retreat to the north after the rain stops. If we chase after them, the journey will be longer. It is too risky to go deep into the wilderness without provisions." The Empress asked, "What do you have in mind?" "I don't have any good ideas." Ning Kai stood up and said, "First of all, we must take all the provisions in Heilin City, and we must make a good calculation. All the provisions must be supplied to the war horses first. People can starve, and they won't die after a few days of starvation, and they can still move forward with the horses. If it is still not enough in the end, we will kill the horses." The generals were silent for a moment, and then agreed in a low voice. Han Qing frowned and said, "If we take all the provisions in the city, what about the garrison?" Ning Kai said, "The garrison in the city will follow the Northern Battlefront Army to the south." Han Qing said in surprise, "The garrison will follow the Northern Battlefront Army to the south." When Ning Kai was about to say something, the Empress said, "As long as the people are still there, the Tang Empire is still there. Even if Heilin City is lost, we can take it back one day." Time was running out. After the discussion, the generals left in a hurry to arrange various matters for the army to retreat to the south. Master Huang Yang went to meditate and treat his wounds, and the Empress went to see the 6th prince, who was a little frightened. At this time in the quiet room, except for the gray pine coffin, there were only Ning Kai and Han Qing. "When you and the daughter of Yama crossed the border in the black carriage, I was watching you from the top of the city wall." Han Qing looked at him and said. Ning Kai said, "Now is not the time to be sentimental. General, please say what you want to say." Han Qing glanced at the gray pine coffin and said, "His Majesty loved you very much, and now you have already known his last wish. So what do you think?" Ning Kai said, "Go on." Han Qing continued, Everyone knows that you are close to the princess, but you have an old grudge against the empress. His Majesty passed the throne to the sixth prince. In fact, I don't care which side you support, but I hope that you can make your attitude clear now. The road to the south is difficult, and if there are problems at that time. Footsteps came from outside the door. Han Qing said no more. The empress came in with a young man. The young man was wearing a bright yellow prince's costume. He rolled his eyes and looked at Ning Ke up and down. He seemed to be a little curious and a little timid, as if he was not used to seeing strangers. Ning Ke was silent for a long time beside the pine coffin. Then he looked at the prince and asked, "Do you want to be the emperor of the Tang Empire?" The prince was a little confused and looked up at his mother. The empress gently touched his head, and her expression was very doting. The prince looked at Ning Ke and thought for a long time. Then he said, "My father asked me to be the emperor, so I will be the emperor." Ning Ke said, "Very good. What is yours, and no one can take it away from you." The empress looked at him quietly and said, "Is this the Academy's promise?" Ning Ke said, "This is my promise, but it is still effective." The empress said, "I don't doubt this." Ning Ke asked, "Why?" The empress said, "Because you married Sang Sang in the end." Looking at her gentle and beautiful face, Ning Ke recalled the scene when she turned to look at him on the grassland below the city. Her black hair flew across her face. That scene was very beautiful, with a kind of soul-stirring beauty. He found that the empress knew him very well. Then he suddenly understood why His Majesty insisted on marrying her. The food stored in Helan City for many years was moved away. The horses that died on the battlefield in front of the city were cut off by the Tang army and piled up in the trailers as backup food. It didn't take long for tens of thousands of Tang army to leave Helan City. A general of the Northern Battlefront Army asked if they should burn down the city guarding crossbows and buildings to prevent them from falling into the hands of the barbarians of the palace. The Empress and Ning Ke both disagreed. In their opinion, the Tang Empire would come back in the future, and these were all the wealth of the Tang Empire. The Tang army, besieged by the storm and enemies in the depths of the wilderness, finally began their journey to the south. When they came, their country was the most powerful in the world. But when they returned, their country was already in a precarious situation, like a broken boat in the ocean that could be destroyed at any time. Therefore, the journey back was a bit silent, depressed, and nervous. Ning Ke's expression did not change, but his hand holding the reins clenched from time to time for no reason, and his knuckles turned white. It showed that he was more nervous and depressed than anyone else. After a difficult journey, the Tang army finally arrived at the foothills of Min Mountain. The green in their field of vision was getting thicker, and the autumn trees on the mountain were getting redder. There was still a long way to go to the northern military camp. The Tang army was very hungry and tired, and there was not much food left. But as long as there were no major problems, they should be able to return to the south smoothly. Ning Ke finally relaxed a little, and the fear and nervousness that had been hidden deep in his heart broke out at the same time. He could no longer control his emotions, and proposed to go west. Several generals of the Tang army strongly objected. Under the background of the Golden Palace's invasion, no matter how strong he was, once he was alone and surrounded, he could only die. Everyone knew why Ning Ke wanted to go west, but so much time had passed, and even if he went there now, what could he do? In the end, Her Majesty agreed to Ning Ke's request, and even sent an elite cavalry team to escort him. The Seven Cities fortress could not have lasted until now. Han Qing looked at the dozens of cavalry rushing to the west of the wilderness, and said with a frown, "It is meaningless for him to take a look now, except for adding to his pain." Her Majesty said, "There are many things that you can only really give up when you see it with your own eyes. Although Ning Ke is not an ordinary person, he is no different from ordinary people in this respect." The city of Wei was right in front of them. In the middle of the barren wilderness, there was a quiet city made of earth. When the wind blew, The dust on the city walls would fall down, landing on the butcher's chopping board, and falling into the wine jars that had forgotten to cover them. The city of Wei was still the same city of Wei, simple and crude. The city gate was a little crooked as in previous years, but if it was closed from the inside, even a battering ram could hardly break it. Today, the city of Wei seemed a little too quiet. The old dust accumulated under the earth wall had traces of black in it, but no one knew whether it was the color of blood coagulation or something else. Ning Ke waved his hand to signal the cavalry to stop. He jumped off the horse, walked to the city gate and pushed it. The crooked city gate fell with a sound, and the dust rose slightly. He stood at the city gate in silence for a long time, and then walked inside. The cavalrymen sat on horseback, watching him walk into the city of Wei, and their expressions were a little complicated. After a long time, Ning Ke walked out of the city of Wei. His expression was still calm, his back was still straight, and his right hand on the hilt was still stable. No change could be seen, as if he had seen nothing in the city of Wei. "What's the situation inside?" the Tang cavalry officer asked. Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Nothing." The officer frowned slightly and signaled several cavalrymen to enter the city of Wei. Ning Ke whispered, "Don't go in." The cavalrymen glanced at the officer, and seeing that he did not say anything, they lifted the reins and rode towards the city of Wei. Ning Ke did not turn around and roared, "Don't go in." His voice was loud and violent like thunder, exploding in the wilderness outside the city of Wei. The horses under the cavalrymen were startled and stood up. A broken wine banner swayed gently in the city of Wei. Hearing Ning Ke's angry roar, people finally understood what had happened in the city of Wei. No one tried to go in to have a look. Ning Ke walked to his own horse. With every step he took, his head lowered a little, and his body became a little shorter. "When I left I told you, don't grow old, don't die, and wait for my filial piety. But now, you old fox, always like to go back on your words." Ning Ke muttered to himself. Then he laughed, and the smile was a little tragic. Although the army did not pass through the city of Wei, they finally entered the war zone. The terrible destruction caused by the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court at the frontier fortress, and the ruins of the Tang settlements, appeared in front of people's eyes. This was an exhausted army, but the blood, fire, ruins, broken walls, and dead clansmen they saw along the way had aroused their almost crazy fighting spirit. After a period of rest and replenishment of food and fodder, they would become a terrifying military force. Even now, many soldiers were eager to fight with the Golden Tribe cavalry with red eyes. Fortunately or unfortunately, the Tang army returning south along the Min Mountain did not encounter the main force of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. After killing dozens of grassland cavalry, they approached the northern military camp. The Tang army returning south re-established contact with the general's mansion. Because of the large number of people, it was not convenient for them to enter the northern military camp at the same time. The general's mansion sent an elite cavalry to meet them, deliver food and fodder, and at the same time, they were ordered to take the empress, the prince, and most importantly, the emperor's coffin back to the northern military camp. After a temporary discussion, the Tang army did not raise any doubts about the order of the general's mansion. The army rested on the spot, while the empress and the sixth prince set off with the emperor's coffin. His Majesty's coffin was simple but very heavy. It weighed dozens of pine logs and needed several warhorses to pull it. This was the biggest difficulty the Tang army encountered all the way back south. Now the northern military camp was responsible for resisting the Golden Tribe Royal Court, so it was naturally a bit chaotic. The Tang army guarding around the general's mansion looked anxious. However, when the carriage carrying the pine coffin came from outside the city, soldiers and ordinary people all knelt on the ground, looking sad. Not many people noticed that Ning Ke was sitting in the carriage beside the pine coffin. Several warhorses pulled the heavy gray coffin slowly on the street. The wheels rolled on the hard stone ground, making a monotonous and frightening sound. Suddenly there were several shouts on the street. "Kill the demon empress! Wash away the shame for his majesty!" The shouts shook the sky. A Tang general led hundreds of cavalrymen, rushing from the street, their padeos shining. In the carriage in front, the empress held the sixth prince in her arms, looking calm. Ning Ke sat beside the pine coffin with his head slightly lowered, looking calm, as if he heard nothing. At the beginning of the book, when Ning Ke left the city of Wei, he left 3 sentences for General Ma Shixiang. They are the 3 sentences mentioned in this chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 722. Ning Ke and the Empress did not react to the sudden ambush. It was not because they were brave, but because they dared to leave the Tang army to come to the northern military camp. Naturally, they had a basic trust in the general. The sound of padeos colliding with each other was loud and shrill. After the initial shock and panic, the cavalry battalion that was responsible for escorting the Empress and her entourage immediately began to organize defense and counterattack. On both sides of the street, many archers had been lying in ambush. Those Tang soldiers who tried to ambush the convoy were subdued in a very short time. During this process, the Empress's expression did not change. She just held the sixth prince, looked down into his eyes and whispered something to him. Ning Ke kept his head down until the end of the battle. The 2 Tang generals were shot by arrows and fell off their horses, but they refused to surrender. They killed themselves with their swords. Only then did he raise his head and look out of the window. The carriage finally arrived at the general's mansion. Su Qi, the wilderness-suppressing general of the Tang Empire, had already led the generals to kneel at the stone steps in front of the mansion to welcome them. Before General Su Qi could apologize, the Empress had already led the sixth prince out of the carriage. She looked at Su Qi, who was kneeling at the stone steps, and said calmly, "It's really not easy to walk to the general's mansion." Su Qi did not make any excuses or apologize. He respectfully led the emperor's coffin into the mansion, and then invited the empress and the prince to the back house to have a rest. Ning Ke was no longer beside the pine coffin. He sat in the study and drank tea. Not long after, Su Qi pushed open the door of the study and walked in. Ning Ke had met 3 of the 4 great generals of the Tang Empire. But he had never met Su Qi, but according to the Empress's description and Han Qing and other generals' supplement, he was already very clear about this general's temperament. The 2 generals who rebelled had nothing to do with the Gushan commandery. They were the former subordinates of the northern military camp. Su Qi said straightforwardly. Ning Ke said, "It has nothing to do with the Gushan commandery, but it doesn't mean it has nothing to do with Hua Shangyue or the princess, unless you insist that it's your relationship." Su Qi said after a moment of silence, "I heard that Mr. 13 and the princess were very close." Ning Ke said, "I also heard that General Su Qi was most loyal to the former emperor. The rescript of the West Hill Divine Palace has been spread all over the world. I think Mr. 13 has already seen it. It's inevitable that the morale of the army is a little shaken. That's why today's assassination happened." Su Qi said, "I understand what you meant. But since the Empress is really a member of the Devil's Doctrine, then the sixth prince can't inherit the throne or return to Chang'an." Ning Ke asked why. Su Qi said, "Because the West Hill Divine Palace will not allow a descendant of the Devil's Doctrine to rule the Tang Empire." Ning Ke said, "Idiot, the West Hill Divine Palace is already attacking the Tang Empire." Su Qi was silent. He suddenly asked, "There is one thing I want to know." Ning Ke said, "General, please go ahead." Su Qi said, "It is said that the death of the former emperor has something to do with Her Majesty." Ning Ke said, "What an idiot. His Majesty has been suffering from an old illness for many years. As his most trusted general, you must know this. Even if it had something to do with Her Majesty, it was many years ago. His Majesty didn't even care about it. Do you think you are qualified to hate him for His Majesty?" Su Qi frowned slightly, but it was obvious that he looked a little more relaxed. After thinking for a long time, he looked at Ning Ke seriously and said, "You persuade the Empress to stay in the northern military camp with the sixth prince. I can guarantee that as long as I am alive, I will keep them safe." Ning Ke looked at his eyes quietly and did not say anything. Su Qi responded to his gaze calmly, without any change in his expression. Ning Ke suddenly said, "Although I have said it before, I can't help but repeat it. I really want to know if the rumor is true. Is the general really loyal to His Majesty?" Su Qi said, "I am willing to prove it with my life." Ning Ke said, "You don't have to use your life. You should now be very clear that the former emperor passed the throne of the Tang Empire to the sixth prince. The edict in Chang'an must be fake." "Then what do you think we should do now, Mr. 13? Su Qi said in a cold voice. "Let the empress bring the sixth prince back to Chang, and to fight for the throne with the new emperor? Let the Tang army split, and even fall into a civil war? If it were any other time, I would not hesitate to carry out the real edict of His Majesty, and help the sixth prince to ascend the throne, even if the Tang Empire fell into a civil war. I don't care if the empress is from the devil's doctrine or not, but not now." Su Qi looked very serious and said, "Now the whole world is fighting against the Tang Empire. The cavalry of the Golden Palace is invading the south. The army of the West Hill Divine Palace is marching north. The Qinghe County has rebelled, and the northeast border military has been destroyed. The Tang Empire is surrounded by enemies on all sides, and is in a precarious situation. At this critical moment, the Tang Empire cannot afford any internal strife." Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "What do you think we should do, General? In the face of foreign enemies, the Tang Empire needs unity most." "I can't watch you and the Empress lead tens of thousands of soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army south to Chang'an. These soldiers should be bathed in blood in the northern frontier, instead of wasting their lives in the internal strife. So I want you to persuade the Empress to stay in the northern military camp with the sixth prince." Su Qi stared into his eyes and said, "If you think this is a betrayal to the former emperor, then I can promise you that once the Tang Empire survives this crisis, the Northern Battlefront Army will still support the sixth prince." Ning Ke frowned slightly. He had to admit that the general's words made sense. And the Tang Empire did need tens of thousands of soldiers returning to the south to fight against the invasion. However, the door of the study squeaked, and was pushed open from the outside. The Empress walked in, and looked at the two. She said calmly, "I want to go back to Chang'an." Without hesitation, Su Qi knelt in front of her and kowtowed repeatedly until his forehead bled. His voice seemed to be in extreme pain as he said in a trembling voice, "Your Highness, I have been loyal to His Majesty all my life, but now I do not dare to carry out His Majesty's posthumous edict. My heart is filled with guilt, and I fear that I will not be able to eat or sleep in peace for the rest of my life. However, in this dangerous situation, the Tang Empire cannot fall into chaos. Your Highness, please reconsider." The Empress looked at him and smiled. She said, "If I bring the sixth prince back to Chang'an, will Chang'an fall into chaos? Or would the great Tang fall into chaos? The general overestimates the strength of us orphans and widows." Su Shi was stunned. He did not understand what the Empress meant. "The tens of thousands of Tang soldiers returning to the south were originally your northern battlefront army. They had followed His Majesty to the battlefield. How could they return to Chang'an with me?" The Empress said, "I will leave these cavalrymen to you. Only my son and I will return to Chang'an. I think the general will not worry about anything in this way, right?" Su Shi was shocked speechless. He thought to himself that the new emperor had already ascended to the throne, and the princess was in charge of the country. Under such circumstances, if the Empress brought the prince back to Chang'an, it would be no different from suicide. Ning Ke suddenly looked at the Empress and said, "I will go back with you. This is the last chapter of the scheduled release. When I was releasing it at night, my hand shook, and I pressed the button to release it immediately. It scared me, so I unblocked it immediately. I hope no one will subscribe again. Well, I will continue to write and try to release it every hour on time." To be continued. If you like this work, Please come to Chitian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 723. No matter how fiercely Su Qi, Han Qing, and the other generals in the Northern Battlefront Army objected, the Empress would not change her mind. She insisted on taking the sixth prince back to Chang'an. The generals had no choice. Now that the Golden Tribe was invading the south, and the northern frontier of Tang was in danger, they could not send an army to escort them. Finally, they decided to send 500 elite cavalries with them. On the morning before leaving the northern military camp, Ning Ke found Su Qi again and said, "Her Majesty and I brought back a troop of tens of thousands of people. I think we are qualified to ask you for a few people." Su Qi thought for a while and said, 500 cavalries are indeed too few. That's not what I meant. Ning Ke said, I don't want living people. I want dead people. Su Qi understood what he meant. He frowned slightly and said, the two generals committed suicide on the spot after the assassination failed. Even if you have their bodies, it's useless. Ning Ke said, the two generals are dead, but the hundreds of cavalries who participated in the assassination have not been punished. I know they are now locked up in the military camp. Su Qi frowned even more and said, Mr. 13, do you want to kill them? In normal times, those who dared to disturb His Majesty's body and assassinate the Empress and the Crown Prince will be sentenced to death. I know why you don't want to kill them now, Ning Ke said, so I won't ask you to kill all of them. But I want you to promise me that they must be sent to the most dangerous battlefield in the front line. After a few years, when the war is over, if there are any of them alive, I will not pursue it. If they die, it will be considered as atonement. After saying this, he turned around and left. When he was about to leave, he encountered a very tricky problem. The heavy pine coffin. Everyone knew that Ning Ke needed time and secrecy to bring the Empress and the sixth prince back to Chang'an. If the heavy pine coffin went with them, it would be very inconvenient. Su Qi suggested to leave His Majesty's coffin in the northern military camp for the time being to motivate the soldiers. The Empress shook her head and said softly, His Majesty wants to go back to Chang'an, so I have to bring him back. Burn it. She looked at the heavy gray coffin and said. Everyone was shocked. The Empress smiled and said, His Majesty is such a carefree person, why would he care about such things? Ning Ke recalled the incessant scolding of idiots in the imperial palace and said with a smile, Indeed. The pine coffin began to burn on the pile of wood. The bark of the tree crackled and sparks flew. In the end it turned into ashes. When it rains, it pours was far from enough to describe the continuous blows the great Tang was suffering, and precarious was insufficient to describe its perilous state. Wave after wave, each higher than the last, was howling toward it. The Battle of Capital Chung was a great shock to the Tangs, but it did not affect their confidence at all. It was the Golden Tribe royal court's move to the south that made all the Tangs feel uneasy. The rescript of the West Hill Divine Palace called for the world to attack the Tang Empire, which made the Tangs feel the possibility of their country being destroyed for the first time. The recent news of Qinghe County's treason was the heaviest blow. They were angry because of uneasiness, because of fear, because of anger, and because of anger. The entire Chang'an was in an atmosphere of anger. The ministers of the Empress's faction, who had forced themselves to endure for the sake of the country, could no longer bear the current situation. They blamed the new emperor and the princess in the palace, in the court, and in public. The officials questioned the palace why the Empress and the sixth prince had not returned to Chang'an, why there was no news from Helan City, and why Qinghe County, the princess's ally, would do such a shameless thing at the most critical moment of the imperial court. They asked the emperor and her highness why they would have the face to see the former emperor. After the academy closed its doors, the new batch of students from the front yard were sent home or volunteered in the various departments of the imperial court. They and the young students from the imperial college were the most passionate and excited group of people in Chang'an. When the Tang Empire was shrouded in dark clouds, they finally took to the streets and gathered in front of the imperial palace to start petitioning. As for the specific content of the petition, these students were not very clear. But in short, they wanted to change the current situation. They wanted to see change. No one knew where the news came from, but it began to spread among the petitioners. The Defender General of the state, Su Shi, who was supposed to return in a few days, had actually been assassinated by the West Hill Divine Palace in the southern Shao Mountain area. The whereabouts of General Su Shi had been betrayed to the West Hill Divine Palace by a noble in the palace. As for why that noble would do this, it was obvious that he had come to the wrong position. He was afraid that General Su Shi, who had always been known for his uprightness, would return to Chang and then overthrow him from the throne. When the news spread from the petitioners to all parts of Chang, and more people expressed their anger and doubts on the streets. The entire Chang, and seemed to have become countless angry rivers. Angry rivers were often muddy, so some people began to fish in the muddy waters, and some tried to turn into fish and slip away. The hidden sentries and spies that the West Hill Divine Palace had planted in Chang, and for hundreds of years began to move. They were ready to take this opportunity to make the situation even more chaotic. Cao Shaoxu received the imperial edict and led the valiant cavalry battalion to the east to resist the invaders. A part of the Yulin royal guards had already gone north to fight against the cavalry of the Golden Palace. Chang'an seemed to be impregnable, but in fact, there were only about 800 Yulin royal guards and hundreds of palace guards. Together with the runners of the Chang'an local government, they could maintain law and order and suppress riots. The situation was precarious. The Qinghe County Guild Hall was located in a prosperous area of Chang'an. Before the news of the warlords defecting to the enemy came, it had been a place under the imperial court's surveillance. Now it was heavily guarded. The descendants of the warlords who were trapped in the guild hall looked gloomy, waiting for their unknown fate. However, some of them looked at the gradually chaotic situation and had other ideas. Li Huiyuan was also very angry. He even felt that he was angrier than the petitioners in front of the imperial city. He felt that he was innocent. The pain of not being understood was like a poisonous snake biting his heart. Yes, he had asked He Mingqi to spend a lot of effort to find General Su Shi's whereabouts. He was also the one who had asked He Mingqi to find a way to contact the bigwigs of the West Hill Divine Palace. The situation at that time was completely different from now. At that time, only the northeast border military was destroyed, and the Tang Empire still seemed to be strong and unshakable. However, when the news of the Golden Palace's invasion reached Chang'an, he immediately ordered He Mingqi to stop the plan. He even exposed his sinister actions to find a way to inform Su Shi. However, the bigwigs of the West Hill Divine Palace did not listen to him. He Mingqi and the military ministry did not contact Su Shi. Su Shi died just like that. Can you blame me? If that old guy really thought of me as an emperor, how could he leave the Southern Army without an imperial edict? If he had stayed in the Southern Army, how could he have died? Why is everyone blaming me now? It's all my fault. The main hall of the imperial palace was extremely lonely and cold. Li Huiyuan sat on the chair and looked at the night sky outside the hall in a daze. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, and then flashed back again. The eunuchs and palace maids were very afraid of him now because he was very angry. This made him even angrier because he clearly saw indifference, alienation, and contempt in the eyes of the eunuchs and palace maids. When I was an emperor and a prince, you could look at me with so much respect and fear. Why did you dare to leave me so rudely now? Li Huiyuan could not stand it anymore. From yesterday to tonight, he had ordered people to secretly kill several eunuchs and palace maids. However, even so, he still could not see the expression in their eyes that he wanted to see, so he became even angrier. He suddenly felt that this cold and lonely hall was not a place for people to stay. He suddenly stood up and waved his hand to push a eunuch who was begging him to the ground. Then he walked to the depths of the imperial garden with Su Chongshan, who had been guarding outside the hall. It was late autumn, and the imperial garden was also bleak. Fortunately, there were several kinds of flowers in full bloom, which were very charming in the night sky. Looking at the beautiful flowers, Li Huiyuan finally calmed down a little. "Why do you think these people don't understand me?" he said with a frown. Su Chongshan glanced at the animal eaves on the eaves of the palace in the distance. After a moment of silence, he said, "Because you are not a person who is easy to understand." Li Huiyuan did not notice that Su Chongshan was not respectful to his title. He asked confusedly, "What do you mean?" Su Chongshan said, "No matter how you got the throne, you're the emperor of the Tang Empire now. Anyone with a normal brain wouldn't do what you did. But the strange thing is that you always seem to be able to find a reasonable explanation for what you've done. It seems that your brain is actually normal. Normal people are always doing abnormal things. Who do you think can understand that?" When he said the first sentence, Li Huiyuan came to his senses, but he did not respond. He continued to listen to him in silence, but his face became more and more gloomy. "It seems that you also want to rebel against me." He looked at Su Chongshan and said coldly. Su Chongshan slightly leaned forward and bowed. When he straightened up, his body became like a mountain. "His Majesty has done me a great favor. I have some psychological barriers to killing you, but after these days it has disappeared, because you living in this world is the biggest shame of His Majesty." Li Huiyuan looked a little nervous, but he did not turn around and run away. He said in a sharp voice, "You have been in the palace for many years. Don't you know that you can't kill me here? So I did not do it until you came to the imperial garden to relax." Su Chongshan said, "You may not know, but this is the farthest place in the palace from the other halls. The animal eaves on the eaves in the hall can no longer protect you." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 724. Don't lie to me. My father was always accompanied by the nation master, or Master Huang Yang, when he went out of the palace. He never worried about his safety in the palace because of the protection of the God-stunning array. No one could assassinate me in the palace. Li Huiyuan scolded. "I'd like to see how you can kill me." He seemed calm and confident, but his voice began to tremble in the end. Su Chongshan raised his right fist and said expressionlessly, "It's easy to kill you. One punch is enough." Su Chongshan punched out, breaking through the wind and landing heavily on a yellow paper umbrella. With a bang, the umbrella sank deeply, but it was not torn. He Mingqi held the umbrella in one hand and grasped Li Huiyuan with the other, retreating more than 10 feet. A little further back was the inconspicuous little building. There were many beasts carved with stone eaves squatting on the palace walls a little further away. After Su Chongshan's punch, these beasts slowly released a very faint aura. Su Chongshan felt the aura. His face turned pale, but he didn't care. He had been a guard in the imperial palace for decades, from the most common guard with a saber to the current chief imperial guard. In terms of understanding the imperial palace's formations, there was no second person in the world. Even Ning Ke, who was in charge of the God-stunning array under the order of Master Yin Se, was not as good as him in this respect. At this time, he was more alert to He Mingqi, who was standing in front of the small building. "Why are you here?" He Mingqi didn't answer his question. He frowned and looked at him. He said, "I didn't expect that there was a survivor of the devil's doctrine hiding in the palace for so many years." Li Huiyuan was a little stunned and then said with hatred, "You really are the subordinate of that evil woman." Su Chongshan ignored him and looked at He Mingqi calmly. He said, "These years, you have indeed hidden a lot of cultivation. Unfortunately, you are still no match for me. Even if you become the nation master of the Tang Empire in the future, you are still no match for me." He Mingqi looked at him and said, "You are a powerhouse of the devil's doctrine. I am no match for you. But there is one thing. Your judgment is wrong. So the one who will die today will be you." Su Chongshan suddenly felt that the aura from the beasts on the eaves had suddenly become stronger. Thinking of how this person appeared in front of the small building in the middle of the night, He couldn't help but think of an unbelievable possibility. He looked at He Mingqi in shock and said, "How dare you come down here? You're actually able to activate the eye of the formation." He Mingqi glanced at Li Huiyuan and said with a smile, "This is the privilege His Majesty gave me. As for the array eye, I don't have the array eye pestle, but I can activate the killing array in the palace." Su Chongshan let out a muffled groan, and his face suddenly turned pale. He felt that his chest was getting tighter and tighter, and his heart was beating faster and faster. It was so fast that his ribs were about to break and burst out. He took a deep breath and forcibly resisted the suppression of the god-stunning array. With a roar, his strong body rushed forward and punched Li Huiyuan, who was next to He Mingqi. He Mingqi didn't expect that the powerhouse of the devil's doctrine could be so powerful under the killing array. His face suddenly turned serious. He quickly held the yellow umbrella in front of him and pulled Li Huiyuan behind him. Su Chongshan's right fist, and even his entire body, heavily struck the yellow paper umbrella. The yellow paper umbrella cracked, and the umbrella was broken. He Mingqi spat out a mouthful of blood. He fell backward and hit Li Huiyuan. Li Huiyuan cried out in pain. He didn't know how many bones were broken. Su Chongshan stood like a mountain and clenched his fist, ready to strike again. In the dark of the night, there was a soft sound in the imperial garden. His face instantly turned as white as snow. He held his chest in pain and then fell down. His heart was broken. In the dark of the night, there were broken porcelain everywhere on the floor of the palace. Almost all the eunuchs and palace maids had palm prints or scars on their faces. They also looked frightened and uneasy. After the treatment of the imperial physician, Li Huiyuan's injury was finally stabilized. He looked at the tight bandages on his naked body, and the pale He Mingqi who kept coughing. The lingering fear in his heart turned into anger. He Mingqi coughed and said, "Your Majesty, we should inform Her Highness immediately. Don't disturb my sister." Li Huiyuan didn't know why he didn't want to see his sister now. Or maybe he didn't dare to see her. Even in such a dangerous situation, he subconsciously wanted to block the news. He looked at the eunuchs and palace maids in the hall and said coldly, "Whoever dares to talk will be beaten to death." The eunuchs and palace maids hurriedly knelt on the ground. Li Huiyuan thought of the previous danger and became angrier. His eyes became a little blood red. His uninjured right hand trembled slightly. Then he slammed the table heavily and said coldly, "The subordinates of these evil women are still unwilling to give up. When the empire is about to fall, they even want to take away my throne." He Mingqi said softly, "Your Majesty, please be careful. We need to be careful." Li Huiyuan scolded angrily. "What do we need to be careful? You and my sister always told me to be patient. You told me to focus on the overall situation. But look at what those people have done. They want to kill me. How can I bear it?" A cold expression appeared on the face of the young emperor, who had just ascended the throne. He stared at He Mingqi's eyes and said, "I don't want to bear it anymore. Kill them all." Zhuge Warren was waiting for the good news from the palace at home. He was very patient. In his view, Su Chongshan had hidden his identity in the palace for so many years, and was extremely reliable. As long as he took action, the new emperor Li Huiyuan would have no chance to survive. However, he didn't get the news of the new emperor's sudden death. Instead, several men in black appeared. Zhuge Warren didn't even have time to beg for mercy before he was killed by these former subordinates. Then, assassins appeared in the minister of the Ministry of Rites and the minister of Taichung Temple. Chang'an City was full of rumors and murderous cries. The people were in chaos. Who took advantage of the chaos to set fires? There were inexplicable conflicts and deaths in the crowd. The chaotic situation was getting worse and worse. The officials on the Empress side suffered extremely cruel blows and suffered heavy casualties. These officials also had strong servants in their mansions. But how could they stop the cultivators? The former Grand Secretary's mansion had long been deserted. Tonight, the front door of the Zeng mansion became noisy and tense again. The lantern hanging on the wall by the steward had long been knocked down with sticks and was burning under the stone steps. The crowd came out of nowhere and shouted desperately, trying to rush into the mansion. With a bang, the gate of the Zeng mansion was finally pushed down by the crowd. No one knew how many people rushed in, beating people and smashing things in sight. The stewards and servants in the mansion were holding weapons, but they were relatively few in number. They were defeated again and again. Several men in black who had just rushed over were killed by a flash of cold light in the night, before they had time to do anything. The steward and servants were injured and bleeding. Gradually they were disrupted. The crowd rushed to the back of the Zeng mansion and shouted angrily or excitedly, "Find the demonist's parents and stone them to death." In the garden of the back house, Zeng Jing and his wife listened to the shouting from the front yard and looked at the vegetable fields that had long stopped bearing fruit in autumn. They looked at each other in silence and slowly put their hands together. "Since my daughter's accident, I have retired and no longer cared about the affairs of the court. Even after so many changes, such as the new emperor's ascension to the throne and the empress's invitation, I never went. I thought I was honest enough and kept a low profile. I didn't expect that the brother and sister in the palace still remembered me." Zeng Jing looked at his wife and said softly, "I'm sorry to have dragged you down." Mrs. Zeng said with tears in her eyes, "I have nothing to be afraid of if I can die with you. I just think about how sad our poor daughter will be if she can't see us again." "If it weren't for that girl, we wouldn't have." Zeng Jing paused and then sighed. "Forget it. Let's not talk about this. This is probably our fate." At this moment, the almost crazy mob finally rushed into the back house of the Zeng mansion. Zeng Jing looked at the bloodstained table legs and stones in their hands. He held his wife in his arms and said nothing. At this moment, He Mingqi appeared beside the vegetable field with a yellow oiled paper umbrella under his arm. He looked at the middle-aged man leading the crowd and frowned slightly. The enraged and deranged crowd gradually dispersed. The back garden of the Zeng mansion became quiet again. Zeng Jing and his wife didn't have time to check on the injuries of the stewards and servants. They looked at He Mingqi with many questions. If it weren't for this person, they would have been killed tonight. But it was obvious that this person was the culprit of the chaos in Chang'an tonight. Otherwise, why would the mob and the leader retreat after seeing his eyes? "I heard that you will become the nation master of the Tang Empire," Zeng Jing said. He Mingqi smiled and said, "I don't think I will have such a chance." Zeng Jing said in a cold voice, "You did such a bloody thing, so of course you are not qualified." He Mingqi was talking about opportunities, while he was talking about qualifications. They were expressing different meanings. "I never said I was a good person." He Mingqi looked at him and said, "So you don't have to scold me, and you don't have to ask me why I let the Zeng mansion go tonight. Because I don't understand it myself. You are the birth parents of the Yama girl. Why can't you die?" He Mingqi murmured to himself. It seemed that he was really confused, but he couldn't figure out the reason. He shook his head and left the Zeng mansion. The crowd left, but the gate of the Zeng mansion had been broken. It was very unsafe on this chaotic night. What was more troublesome was that someone had lit a fire in the front yard, and the fire was getting bigger and bigger. Zeng Jing and his wife, as well as the injured family members, walked out of the mansion one by one. After the horse carriages were set up, they went to the Yanming Lake and hid in their son-in-law's yard for the night. At this moment, dozens of men in green shirts and pants ran over with short knives in their hands. The leader of the group heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Zeng Jing and his wife were fine. "Sir, Mr. Qi asked me to take you to the Spring Breeze Pavilion. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 725. In the dark of the night, many figures jumped over the wall and sneaked into the garden. He Mingqi had many loyal subordinates in the South School of Haoyan Taoism and the Imperial Center administration over the years. Although there were not many of them, the lethality they caused was terrible. Li Huiyuan was enraged by the assassination, So he gave him the waste token of the Imperial Center Administration and told him to do whatever he wanted. That night, at least a dozen officials fell in pools of blood, and more innocent people died in the chaos. The officials and soldiers sent by the imperial court to guard the Guild Hall of Qinghe County were also in a mess. They did not notice that many descendants of the warlords of Qinghe County had taken advantage of the chaos to escape. After these people left the Guild Hall, they quickly met with the officials secretly supported by the warlords of Qinghe County. According to the investigation, the chaos in Chang and that night had something to do with these people. Zheng Jing and his family were taken to the Chao Mansion on the 2nd Street of Spring Breeze Pavilion. The servants had their own arrangements, and the injured were treated by the doctors of the Fish Dragon Gang. Zheng Jing brought his wife to visit Old Master Chao. The main hall of the Chao Mansion was brightly lit. Before Zheng Jing could sincerely express his gratitude, Old Master Chao waved his hand to stop him. The old man, who usually only liked to listen to dramas and tease his grandson, looked at the worried Lindsay and said impatiently, "Daughter-in-law, don't worry. As long as your man is alive, no one will dare to make trouble in the mansion. Those who have the guts to attack our house have already gone to the imperial palace." Zheng Jing listened to the old man's words and could not help but shiver. He thought that the old man must have retired from the battlefield. When someone next to him saluted, he realized that there was someone else in the hall. Old Master Chao looked at Chang Siwei and scolded. "The brother and sister in the imperial palace are idiots. Are you an idiot too? If you don't go with the Yulin royal guards to fight against the barbarians, then you have to protect Chang'an. What are you hesitating for? Kill anyone who dares to be on the street at this time. Kill any cultivator who dares to show his face." Chang Siwei accepted the order and left in a hurry. Mr. Qi was also in the hall. The Fish Dragon Gang was the local tyrant of Chang'an. No matter how chaotic the situation was, they could handle it easily. His brothers in the gang did not suffer any losses tonight. Only a few of them were killed by cultivators at the gate of the Zheng Mansion. Mr. Qi was very angry, but he didn't dare to show it in front of Old Master Chao. He asked, Ba, what did the brothers in the gang do? The brothers in the gang have to do something, right?" Old Master Chao gently stroked his beard. Before he could give any advice, he heard the steward's voice coming from outside the hall, saying that the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City, Lord Shangguan, had come to visit Old Master Chao. Old Master Chao's eyes lit up. "Here's what you need to do." Lord Shangguan Yangyu hurriedly walked into the main hall of the Chao Mansion and bowed to Old Master Chao as his nephew. Then he found that Zheng Jing was also there, and his expression turned serious. "Your Excellency, you are more cunning than this old man. I don't think you have anything to ask me. If you are looking for Qi For, you can go and talk to him. I will bring your Excellency Zheng to the back garden." After saying this, Old Master Chao walked out of the hall with Zheng Jing. Shangguan Yangyu looked at the back of Old Master Chao, and his wretched triangular eyes lit up. Then he bowed again with great respect and said, "Old Master Chao, you are too polite." Old Master Chao didn't look back and said, "Your Excellency is the one who is too polite." When Old Master Chao and Zheng Jing completely disappeared, Shangguan Yangyu straightened up and looked at Mr. Qi. After a moment of silence, he asked, "It seems that you are ready to side with Her Majesty?" Mr. Qi said with a smile, "Your Excellency, what are you talking about? We are poor people in Jianghu. How can we be qualified to make a choice on such an important matter? We will do whatever the imperial court says." Shangguan Yangyu sneered and thought that these people were not ordinary people in Jianghu. But he didn't bother to point it out. Thinking that time was tight, he said directly, "Grand Master Qi, I am here to borrow people from you." Mr. Qi was slightly stunned and didn't understand what he meant. He said tentatively, "Your Excellency, you are joking. You are in charge of the Chang and local government. At this moment, I don't want to say those secretive words to you." Shangguan Yangyu looked serious and said, "The Yulin royal guards have to suppress the chaos. The bodyguards have to protect the safety of the palace. My runners and supervisors have to deal with the aftermath and murder cases and maintain public order. I really don't have the manpower So I want to borrow people from you. Are you going to give them to me or not? Mr. Qi had been dealing with Shangguan Yangyu for a long time, but it was the first time that he saw Shangguan Yangyu being so serious. His wretched face actually showed some sense of righteousness, so he couldn't help but become serious. It is my duty to serve the imperial court. But I want to know why you want to borrow people. Many people ran away from the guild hall of Qinghe Prefecture. Two cold lights flashed in Shangguan Yangyu's triangular eyes. He said, the temples of these long-haired monks are in the south. If they run away, everything will be over. Fortunately, there are enemies invading and the city gate of Chang, and will be closed at night. They can't run out for the time being. But now there are only 6 hours left before the city gate is opened. Mr. Qi understood what Shangguan Yangyu meant. He thought for a while and said, no problem. The Fish Dragon Gang can provide as many people as you want. If we don't have enough brothers, I can also send some boys. It's better to see living people. If it doesn't work, dead people will also count. Shangguan Yangyu said. And it's better to find more boys for this matter. Those under you who are armed and dare to kill people have to do another important thing for me. Mr. Qi asked, Your Excellency, please tell me. Shangguan Yangyu said after a moment of silence, the chaos in Chang and tonight is mainly caused by those cultivators. Even if the Yulin royal guards can suppress the street, they can't find those cultivators. Hearing this, Mr. Qi was shocked and said, My brothers in the gang are no match for those cultivators. Shangguan Yangyu said, I don't need your men to kill or capture those cultivators. I just need your men to stop those cultivators from attacking ordinary people. Mr. Qi frowned and said, The cultivators are either in the Imperial Center Administration or the Southern Gate Temple. Not to mention the Fish Dragon Gang. Even if Your Excellency signed the government order and sent the Yamen runners there, it wouldn't work. There are many things that the Chang and local government can't do, but the Fish Dragon Gang can. I got these papers from the military ministry last year. They are the home addresses of the officials and deacons of the Imperial Center Administration, as well as the married Taoists of the Southern Gate Temple. Their old parents, weak wives, and young children should still be at home. Shangguan Yangyu took out a thick stack of papers from his arms with a kind expression and said, The Fish Dragon Gang is the local tyrant of Chang'an. It's easy to find these places, and to invite these women and children to a secret place. Mr. Qi took the addresses and came to himself after a while. He felt a little cold. Looking at the loving face of His Excellency, he said in a trembling voice, This is too cruel. Shangguan Yangyu sighed and said, Actually, I don't want to do this, but the most important thing is to be cruel. Mr. Qi recalled the conversation between Old Master Chao and Shangguan Yangyu before he left the main hall. He finally understood the real meaning and could not help admiring Shangguan Yangyu, but also feeling a little uneasy. Whether it's the Qinghe County Guild Hall, or the Imperial Center Administration, or the Southern Gate Temple, they are not your duty. Mr. Qi asked confusedly, Why did you take such a big risk to do this? Shangguan Yangyu stroked his beard and was about to say something. Mr. Qi saw his expression and knew what he wanted to say. He said, No one in the imperial court will believe that you are a selfless person, so please don't use this reason. I am indeed timid and greedy for money. It's unreasonable to say that I love the Tang Empire. However, if there is no Tang Empire, how can an ugly person like me be an official? How can I be the prefectural magistrate of the capital city? Shangguan Yangyu sighed and said, If the Tang Empire is really destroyed, where can I go to be greedy for money? It's not complicated, so I understand. But it's strange that many people don't understand. Li Yu walked slowly into the hall. She looked very tired, and so were her steps. The news of Qinghe County's rebellion and independence made her feel like a sudden hailstorm after more than 10 days of heavy rain. What she had just learned was like a bolt of lightning falling from a hailstorm. She walked to the bed and looked at her pale brother, who was obviously still in a state of panic. She couldn't help but feel sorry for him. Then she laughed at herself and asked gently, Was it your Majesty who did it? Li Huiyuan saw that her tone was still as gentle as usual, and immediately felt relieved. He said with a smile, "Yes, those traitors wanted to kill me, so I killed them all." Liu sat beside the bed and said after a moment of silence, "General Su sure also wanted to kill you?" The smile on Li Huiyuan's face suddenly became a little stiff. He said, "What are you talking about, sister?" Liu said softly, "Wang Jinglu entered Chang'an yesterday. After he went to the military ministry to find out the news, he came to the palace to see me tonight. That's why I thought of asking you." Li Huiyuan's voice was slightly trembling. He forced a smile and said, "What do you want to ask me, sister?" Li Yu's expression was still very calm. She said lightly, "Qinghe County has rebelled. The hierarch lord of the Divine Hall went around Shao Mountain and entered the Tang Empire. It's understandable that the Imperial Center Administration, the secret guards, and the spies of the military ministry did not find out. But how did the hierarch lord know that the general was stationed at the foot of Shao Mountain? I didn't even know that the general was staying at Shao Mountain that night. How did the Divine Hall know?" Liu looked into his eyes and continued to ask, "The general is a confident and proud person, but he has always been cautious on the battlefield. So I really want to know, how did you know?" The smile on Li Huiyuan's face became more and more stiff, and even more like he was crying. At this time, a calm voice sounded outside the quiet palace door. "Over the years, many cultivators of the South School of Haotian Taoism have joined the army. Now that I am the South School Lord, those people will naturally not think of hiding it from me. The Imperial Center Administration and the military ministry have a closer relationship, and I happen to be in charge of the Imperial Center Administration under His Majesty's orders. So I was very lucky to get the general's return route." The palace door opened and He Mingqi walked in. He held the yellow oiled paper umbrella, which had been somewhat deformed, and bowed slightly to the siblings beside the bed. "To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 726. After a long time, Liu finally turned around. Her movements were a little slow because of exhaustion. She looked at He Mingqi and said, "It seems that the chaos in Chang'an tonight is also caused by you." "Yes," He Mingqi said. "Chang'an is like a weak patient now. Chao Xiaoshu, whom I fear the most, has left. Once the chaos starts, no one can stop it." Liu said, "It seems that the Divine Hall really doesn't understand the Tang people's style. We don't like chaos, so no matter how this chaos ends, it will end soon. Your Highness, what's the point of arguing now?" He Mingqi looked at her and said with a smile, "Just like what the hierarch lord said in the letter to you, you are the one who will face the disaster. The disaster of the Tang Empire will fall on you. Your selfishness and greed are the cause of this disaster. You can't escape from the disaster, so just surrender." Liu said, "Although you have pretended to be a Tang for so many years, you still don't understand us, just like the Divine Hall. In our world, there is no such thing as surrender." He Mingqi clapped his hands and said, "It's loud and clear, but it's empty. Haotian is invincible. Haotian Taoism is eternal. The headmaster is dead. The former emperor is dead. What can the Tang Empire do now? I promised my teacher that I would make the Tang people bleed less, so I hope you will fail as soon as possible." Li Huiyuan listened to the conversation and realized what a big mistake he had made. He was agitated and pale, murmuring, "You are from the Divine Hall. You are from the West Hill Divine Palace. Then why did you save me in the Imperial Garden? Why did you save the Emperor of the Tang Empire?" He Mingqi looked at him and said with pity, "An absurd emperor like your Majesty is the best friend of Haotian Taoism. You are more valuable alive than dead. Although your Highness's recent performance has surprised everyone, your ability still alarmed the Divine Hall. If possible, I will try to kill you. However, it is indeed difficult to kill a member of the Li family in the Imperial Palace of the Tang Empire. Lord Su Chongshan has already tried for me." He looked at Li Yu and said, "But I don't think your Highness has the ability to keep me here. After saying this, He Mingqi turned around and walked out of the hall. He did not walk fast, as if he was not worried that Li Yu would call the guards. His calm attitude was undoubtedly the greatest humiliation to the siblings by the bed. Walking out of the palace, he borrowed the darkest light of the night before dawn to walk into the depths of the imperial garden. Arriving in front of the small building, he raised his head to glance at the sky that was about to rain, and opened the yellow paper umbrella. The yellow paper umbrella had already been severely damaged by Su Chongshan's 2 punches. After it was opened, it looked somewhat comical, but the chi that the umbrella exuded at this moment was sacred and solemn. As he opened the umbrella, many lines suddenly appeared on the vast stone ground in the depths of the small building. Those lines represented the God-stunning array and Chang'an City. The sacred and solemn atmosphere seeped into those lines. The brilliance gradually shone, and then gradually faded away after a while. If there was a divine talisman master, or a great formation master present, they would probably be able to see some subtle changes. There were some obstructions in the middle of some lines, as if there were carriages blocking the Vermilion Bird Avenue in Chang'an City. Standing among the autumn trees in the imperial garden, He Mingqi silently sensed the changes underground. After confirming that it was similar to what he had expected, he nodded with satisfaction. Now Taoism only needed to find the array pestle to break the God-stunning array. If the God-stunning array was broken, Chang'an City would be destroyed. If Chang'an City was destroyed, the Tang Empire would be destroyed. Now the array of the God-stunning array was in the academy in the south of the city. He could stroll in the heavily guarded imperial palace, but he did not have any confidence to go to the academy to get it. However, it did not mean that no one in the world could get it. In the quiet palace, there was a crisp sound of a slap. Li Huiyuan covered his red and swollen cheek, and blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. He looked at his sister in fear, crying and shouting, "I know I was wrong, but what can I do now that I've done it? How could I know that he was from Taoism? That old bastard Li Qingshan lied to us." Li Yu trembled with anger. She felt dizzy and almost fainted. Sister. Li Huiyuan climbed up from the bed and held her hand tightly with his uninjured hand. He said in a trembling voice, "Now there is no other way. We can only surrender to the divine hall." Li Yu looked at him, and suddenly realized that she did not know the brother she had raised. She slapped him heavily in the face again, without any expression on her face. Li Huiyuan seemed to feel no pain at all. His eyes were a little enlarged, but he still held her hand tightly, and did not let her get rid of him. He screamed, "The headmaster is dead! The headmaster is dead! Even the headmaster is dead! Who can fight against heaven? The academy cannot support the Tang Empire. Don't you see that the people inside are not moving? We can only rely on ourselves and Taoism. What else can we do? What should we do?" A strand of hair fell on Li Yu's forehead. She shook her head tiredly and said, "The academy cannot support the Tang Empire. Then I have to continue to support it until I can't. We can't support it anymore." Li Huiyuan's voice was extremely hoarse because of nervousness, fear, and confusion. He said, "Even if the Southern Army does not go to the north, they have to go around the Shao Mountain to reach the verdant canyon. The army of the West Hill Divine Palace has now passed the Great Lake, and will soon pass the Qinghe County. They will soon go straight to Chang'an." Li Yu lowered her head weakly and said, "Chang'an can't be broken." Li Huiyuan said in a trembling voice, "They don't need to break it. They just need to surround Chang'an. There are so many people in the city. Where can we find food?" Li Yu raised her head and gently combed her brother's messy hair. She smiled miserably and said, "In fact, after listening to what you said, I think you are very smart. But why did you get confused earlier?" She had always been praised as a virtuous person by the court officials. Even her father loved and trusted her a lot. She was very capable in both governing and strategizing. But she was a tired and helpless woman at this time. The headmaster of the academy had left, and the whole world was against the Tang Empire. This was a big change that had not happened in 1,000 years. Even if her father was still alive, It would be extremely difficult for him to face such a situation, let alone her. We are the Tangs. We can't surrender. Liu reached out and gently caressed her brother's cheek. She said very seriously, even if we fight to the last moment, we can't surrender. Even if you die, you have to die in the palace. Do you hear me? At this moment, a eunuch hurried into the hall and brought the news he had just received from the military ministry. General Su Qi had sent cavalry to escort the empress and the sixth prince to Wuzhou. Liu was silent. Li Huiyuan opened his eyes wide in shock. The titles of the previous chapter and this chapter are all people's names. I always used this kind of title when I was chronicling Qingxi. Later, when I forgot what I was writing, I did the same. Now that I think about it, He Yu of the Geik are all important people. Moreover, I have a preference for Shangguan Yangyu and the General of the Night. It's a pity that I can't write too much. Besides, this is the 10th chapter. Let's not talk about anything else. There will be an update today. Do you still have a monthly ticket? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.